Inside that briefcase was a life I never imagined I'd have. At 68, I suddenly became richer than any wild dream I'd ever had. And today I thought I was going to change my daughter's entire world. Or at least that's what I believed. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. I'm James. I'm 68 years old. For over 42 years, I made a living hauling 40-ton loads of steel across the darkest roads in North America. These hands are covered in calluses. My back aches whenever the weather turns. I'm used to counting every last coin just to fill up the tank, but today everything is different. Hit subscribe and drop a 9 in the comments for the $9 million you're about to hear about, and let's begin. I'm walking down the street toward Claire's house. It feels strange. I'm not driving my old truck. I'm wearing a worn-out hoodie from the 1990s, faded and frayed at the shoulders. I look like nothing more than a retired old man struggling to get by on a pension. But under my arm, the cream-colored briefcase feels heavy. Not because it's filled with bricks, but because it holds something enormous, $9 million. It's the inheritance from Raymond, my late brother. He spent his entire life deep in the northern mines. He never had children. And now all that money belongs to me, a worn-out old truck driver. I glance at my reflection in the window of a parked car. A hardened face. Tired eyes but burning with a plan. I wanted to give this to Claire. My daughter has struggled far too much. I wanted to see the look of shock in her eyes. I wanted to free her from the constant weight of making ends meet. I stop at her front door. My heartbeat is louder than a diesel engine. I'm about to knock. I'm about to pull her into a hug and tell her our lives are about to change. But then I hear voices from inside. The window is slightly open. Lucas, my son-in-law, is speaking. He's talking about me. Not with concern, not with care, not with love for his aging father-in-law. He calls me a burden, a weight on their little family. He talks about sending me away somewhere so their lives can be easier, less complicated. My steps freeze. A cold rush runs down my spine, colder than any blizzard I ever drove through in the Yukon. I tighten my grip on the handle of the briefcase. $9 million sits quietly inside, waiting to be given or waiting to become a weapon. I take a deep breath. The smell of asphalt mixes with the scent of money. I had imagined all of us stepping into a new chapter together, no more worrying about food bills, survival. I had even included him in that future. I treated him like a son. But he has no idea what he just lost. The money is only part of it. The love I had for him was worth far more, and that love died the moment I heard those words come out of Lucas's mouth. I don't knock. Not yet. I stand there in silence, listening to every insult spilling from the man I was about to help. Each word is like a hammer, driving the final nail into what little patience I had left. I look at the cream-colored briefcase again. It's no longer a gift. It's a trap. And I'm the one setting the bait. After everything he said, even talking about putting me in a nursing home to take my valuable piece of land, Claire stayed silent. That silence hurt more than Lucas's words ever could. My daughter didn't object. She seemed to be considering it. She looked exhausted, tired of taking care of an old man she believed was broke. My chest tightened. I looked down at my hands, scarred from fixing engines and freezing nights from years spent away from home just to send money back so she could grow up, go to school, have a future. And this was what it all came to. Lucas began laying out his plan. First, he'd prepare a set of documents labeled as health insurance papers to trick me into signing. If I hadn't heard this with my own ears, I would have signed without a second thought. I loved that family. I never once imagined they would deceive me. But luck was on my side. I heard everything. Along with the words, I'm old, senile, outdated, dependent. So Lucas wanted my little bungalow. A few $100,000 from selling off my memories cheap, fool. If he had waited just a little longer, he could have had an empire worth millions. I don't know if that's my luck or his misfortune. But in the end, people who don't love their family, who disrespect, who betray their own parents, they deserve exactly what's coming to them. I took a deep breath. The air tasted bitter with humiliation. I stepped back, then another step. I made sure my footsteps were silent. I turned toward my old truck, parked at the corner. The briefcase was still firm in my grip. I wasn't thinking about forgiveness anymore. I was thinking about a lesson for Lucas and for my daughter. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't cry. I would show him what a senile old man really looks like. I would become the burden he wanted me to be. I would let him tighten the noose around his own neck while believing he was winning. I climbed into the truck. The engine roared to life, rough and dry. I glanced at the house one last time through the rearview mirror. This war wouldn't be fought with fists. I would use the one thing Lucas believed: I didn't have patience. And $9 million to burn down everything he had built on lies and greed. Just wait. This revenge will unfold in a way he could never imagine. Because once this old truck driver shifts gears, he doesn't stop until his enemy is crushed beneath the wheels. I sat still inside the cabin of my old truck. The cramped space reeked of engine oil and stale cigarettes. My hands rested on the steering wheel, trembling, not from fear, but from a cold rage. Colder than black ice on a midnight highway, the kind you never see, the kind that can send 40 tons of steel off a cliff in a single blink. I stared at the house through the windshield. The living room lights were still on. Lucas was still in there, laughing at the misery he had planned for me. He called me a burden. He wanted to toss me into a nursing home like a broken toy. His words kept replaying in my head like a misfiring engine, dry, jarring, painful. I glanced at the passenger seat. The cream-colored briefcase sat there. All I had to do was walk in and open it. Lucas would drop to his knees. He'd kiss my boots, beg for forgiveness, beg for a scrap of that money. But no, that would be too easy. A man like Lucas doesn't deserve a quick ending. I took a deep breath. The air inside the cabin felt heavy. I thought back to those long overnight hauls, the times I kept control when the truck started sliding down a steep grade. Rule number 1, never panic. Rule number 2, turn your weakness into your opponent's trap. Lucas thinks I'm a senile old man, a washed-up trucker with a gut and an empty head. Fine. I'll give him exactly what he wants to see. He wants a weak old sheep, I'll wear the wool. But beneath it is a wolf that's crossed thousands of miles of storm and steel. I felt something shift inside me. The pain of betrayal faded, replaced by cold calculation. I wouldn't just take back what's mine, I'd take everything he values. I'd tear down his pride, crush his arrogance, watch him fall to the bottom with nothing to hold on to. I reached for my old phone. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. I needed an ally. Someone who could see through the numbers Lucas thought he had buried. I started the engine. It roared to life like a declaration of war. I backed out of the street and drove off without looking back. Night began to fall. The city lights flickered on. But in my mind there was only one target. A plan had already taken shape, precise and dangerous, like moving explosives through a dark tunnel. Lucas thinks he's the hunter. He has no idea he's already in the sights of a veteran driver. I'll let him enjoy his victory a little longer. I'll let him sign the deals he thinks are wins. What he doesn't know is that every signature is another brick in the prison he's building for himself. This revenge isn't just for me. It's for 42 years of sweat on the open road. And it starts with one phone call. The call that will uncover the darkest secrets of my dear son-in-law. Are you ready to see what happens when a predator becomes the prey? The next 3 weeks were the finest performance of my life. Even a top Hollywood actor couldn't have played a senile old man better than I did. I started wearing my oldest, most worn-out sweaters. I let my beard grow scruffy. I put on a confused look like the world was moving too fast for me to keep up. Every morning I went to Claire and Lucas's house. I didn't bring the cream-colored briefcase anymore. I hid it carefully beneath the floor of my truck. Instead, I carried a plastic bag with a few cheap cereal boxes. I pretended my hands were shaking when I poured coffee. I let milk spill onto the table. I wanted Lucas to see a man falling apart, a real burden. And Lucas swallowed the bait. He started looking at me with that condescending expression. He didn't even bother hiding the contempt in his eyes anymore. Every time I asked how to use the TV remote or how to search on Google, he would sigh. He looked at me like a worn-out tire, something ready to be thrown away. "Lucas, what does this green button do?" I asked, in a weak, trembling voice, fumbling with his tablet. He snatched it out of my hands, growling at me not to touch things I didn't understand. What he didn't know was that when he turned his back, I had already watched how he entered his passcode. I remembered every movement. I started complaining about the price of milk going up. I muttered about my pension not being enough to cover medication. I wanted him to believe I was broke. I wanted him to believe that little bungalow was the last thing I had. And he believed it. He began pushing Claire, talking about protecting my future by managing my assets for me. He used polished words like safety and healthcare. But I knew what he really wanted. The deed. He started inviting me to staged family dinners. He would serve me food with the face of a saint playing the devoted son-in-law in front of Claire. But under the table he kicked my leg whenever I accidentally mentioned old memories. He wanted me silent. He wanted me to fade away into forgetfulness. I looked at Lucas. He looked so confident, like a wolf grinning at an old sheep. What he didn't know, this sheep was recording everything. Every time I pretended to fall asleep on the sofa, I was listening to his secret phone calls. He was drowning in debt, playing a dangerous financial game. And he thought I was his escape card. The contrast was almost laughable. On one side, a man in a polished suit wearing an expensive watch but rotten inside. On the other, an old man in a faded hoodie holding enough wealth to buy his entire company outright. I felt a strange satisfaction, like keeping perfect control on a dangerous mountain road, while the driver behind you speeds blindly into a deadly curve. But I wasn't just waiting. While playing the senile old man, I was moving my pieces. I reached out to someone Lucas would never expect. Someone who could dig through every hidden corner of his bank accounts. Someone who would strip away his polished mask. He thought I was a vein of ore to be mined. He was wrong. I'm the explosive. That night, I sat in the truck cabin again. I opened the cream-colored briefcase. Streetlight spilled in illuminating the checks and inheritance documents. $9 million. Then I flipped to another file. Everything I had gathered on Lucas over the past 3 weeks. Numbers don't lie. And what I found in his email was far worse than him trying to steal my house. A secret big enough to send him to prison immediately. Do you want to know what Lucas really did with Claire's money? Because this ride is about to hit its most dangerous turn. The next morning, I drove my old truck into downtown Toronto. I didn't stop at any cheap parking lots. I headed straight for a towering glass skyscraper, the headquarters of some of the most powerful law firms in the city. In my worn-out hoodie and faded jeans, I looked like a man completely out of place among a sea of sharp suits. The security guard eyed me with suspicion, but the moment I pulled out Raymond's business card, his attitude shifted instantly. I stepped into Amelia's office. She was a razor-sharp financial attorney with a fearsome reputation. She looked at me then, at the cream-colored briefcase I placed on the oak desk. She didn't judge me by my clothes. Amelia was a professional. She knew that real money rarely shows itself. I opened the briefcase. I didn't say much. I pushed the stack of documents, $9 million in inheritance, toward her. I need you to look into someone, I said, my voice rough from years of breathing road dust. I handed her Lucas's name along with the account details I had secretly gathered. I don't want a simple civil case. I want a full forensic accounting investigation. I want to know every single dollar he's spent over the past 2 years. Amelia raised an eyebrow. She began flipping through the papers, her eyes cold and focused like a hawk locking onto prey. She said this wouldn't be cheap. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick stack of cash. I set it on the desk. Here's the retainer. Do whatever it takes. Leave no trace. While Amelia worked, I sat silently by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city. The cars below moved like tiny toys in a rush. Somewhere in those buildings, Lucas was probably sitting in an air-conditioned office sipping expensive coffee, thinking about how to trick this old man into signing a power of attorney. He thought he was in control. He had no idea a net was being cast around him. 3 days later, Amelia called me back. Her expression was more serious than before. She pushed a thick file across the desk. Lucas wasn't just drowning in debt. He was a professional fraudster. He had been running transactions that would make even seasoned financial criminals uneasy. I looked at the numbers, money flowing through a maze of shell accounts, massive losses in cryptocurrency. Then my eyes stopped on a highlighted page. My breath caught. That wasn't his money, and it wasn't from my house. Those transactions were tied to Claire, my daughter. Lucas hadn't just betrayed me. He had done something unforgivable to his own wife. He had turned Claire into a pawn in his reckless gamble. A tremor ran down my spine. This time it wasn't anger. It was disgust. Amelia looked at me and asked what I wanted to do next. I clenched my fists. I could feel the weight of 42 years on the road pressing into these hands. I couldn't let Claire be dragged into the abyss with him. But I also couldn't reveal my plan too soon. I stood up, picked up the cream-colored briefcase, thanked Amelia, and walked out. My plan had just gained a new chapter, a darker one. Lucas thought he was hunting down a senile old man to take a small house. He had no idea he had just stepped on a landmine. If you've made it this far, do us a quick favor, hit subscribe. A lot of people watch without doing it, and it costs you nothing, but it means everything to us. Can you guess what Lucas did using Claire's name? The truth is far worse than a simple scam. And James, will make him pay for every forged signature. I returned to Amelia's office. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. She slid a thick file toward me and looked at me with sympathy. A look I didn't want. James, she said softly, this is much worse than we thought. I looked down at the numbers transaction records laid out in black and white. Lucas had lost over $200,000 on worthless crypto platforms. But that wasn't the worst part. He had secretly taken out a second mortgage on the house he shared with Claire. He had forged her signature. He had turned my daughter into a debtor, without her even knowing. My chest tightened. It felt like a 40-ton engine block was crushing my heart. My Claire. She had always been proud of her independence. She loved him, trusted him blindly. And that man used her trust as fuel for his greed. He wasn't just a bad man. He was a parasite, draining her day by day. Amelia revealed even more. Lucas had used Claire's personal information to open multiple credit lines in her name. The total debt had reached a level that would take her a lifetime to repay, without intervention. I stood up and walked to the window. Toronto moved on below, fast and indifferent. But in my eyes everything had turned gray. And then it hit me. I was wrong. I thought Claire was part of Lucas's plan. I was angry at her silence. But now I understood. Claire wasn't the enemy. She was a hostage. A hostage in her own marriage. A cold resolve settled over me. This was no longer about money. This was a rescue. I had to pull my daughter out of the wreckage Lucas created. But I had to do it the right way. If I simply gave her money, Lucas would burn through it again. No. I had to cut this cancer out, at the root. I turned back to Amelia and spoke in a firm, unshakable voice. I wanted every piece of evidence prepared, every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction. I wanted it all laid out on the lawyer's table by tomorrow. She nodded. She understood. The old tiger was awake. I stepped out of the building. The cold wind hit my face, but I didn't feel it. My blood was moving too fast for that. I drove straight to Claire's house. Lucas was standing in the front yard talking on the phone, a cigar in his other hand. He looked relaxed, confident. He still believed he was the smartest man in the room. He waved at me with that familiar fake smile. "You're back, Dad," I smiled back. The smile of a senile old man, but behind my eyes was a deadly mountain road. I was shifting gears. I was preparing for the final impact. I walked inside and saw Claire sitting in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. I wanted to hold her. I wanted to tell her I'm here. I've got this. But I held back. The act had to continue, just a little longer. That night I lay in the small room at my daughter's house. I listened to Lucas laughing in the next room, celebrating, thinking he was about to take my bungalow. He had no idea. By tomorrow, his life would collapse like a sandcastle in a storm. Do you know what it feels like when a con man realizes he picked the wrong target? The worst truth about Lucas was still sitting inside that cream-colored briefcase, and Judgment Day was coming. The next morning I invited Lucas to lunch. I chose one of the most expensive steakhouses in the city. He was surprised, but then he smirked. He thought the old man wanted one last good meal before being sent off to a nursing home. I wore my dusty old hoodie again, stained with years on the road. I even limped slightly on purpose. I wanted him to see a man falling apart. Lucas arrived 15 minutes late. Tailored suit, an Omega watch worth $9,000 on his wrist, a shiny toy bought with my daughter's tears, and debt. He sat down across from me. No concern. No small talk. He placed a stack of documents on the table. "Dad, we need to settle this once and for all," he said, his tone dripping with superiority. He slid the power of attorney toward me. "Just sign here. Claire and I will take care of everything. We'll find you a good place to stay. You're not in any shape to handle that house anymore." He looked at me like outdated inventory. Something to be cleared out. I picked up the paper, letting my hands tremble just like the script demanded. I stared at the lines, then back at him. "I just don't want Claire to be upset," I whispered, letting a hint of tears form in the corner of my eyes. Lucas didn't feel sympathy, only impatience. He leaned forward, urging me to sign quickly so he wouldn't be late for work. I set the document down and ordered food. I chose the most expensive steak on the menu. Lucas frowned. He was probably calculating how much of my pension this meal would cost. But then he shrugged it off. He figured the house would be his soon anyway. Throughout the meal, I complained about my back pain. I talked about those endless winter hauls. I played the role of a man worn down in both body and mind. Lucas grinned with satisfaction. He started bragging about his grand crypto ventures, how he'd be a millionaire any day now. I nodded eagerly like a child listening to a fairy tale. When the bill came, I fumbled through my pockets, pretending I couldn't find my wallet. I dropped a few coins onto the floor. Lucas sighed in irritation and pulled out his black credit card to pay. He had no idea that card was opened using Claire's identity. He was spending borrowed money to maintain his illusion. I watched him sign the receipt. His hand was steady, confident. But I had already seen the cracks. I had seen the fear hiding beneath that polished surface, the fear of a man about to be crushed by debt. I smiled, a quiet smile he mistook for submission. "All right, Lucas," I said as we stood up. "This afternoon we'll go to your lawyer's office. I'll sign everything." His eyes lit up. He immediately pulled out his phone and called his lawyer to prepare the meeting. He thought he had finally landed the big fish. I stepped out of the restaurant. The midday sun hit my eyes. I looked at Lucas's shiny Audi parked by the curb, then at my old truck in the distance. One was built on lies, the other on truth. The real battle would begin in 2 hours. I had prepared 2 briefcases. The cream one held the future. The yellow one held hell. Lucas thought this afternoon would change his life. He was right, just not the way he imagined. As we got into the car to head to the law office, I saw Lucas texting someone. "It's done." The old man took the bait. I simply fastened my seatbelt. I could feel the silence before the storm. Do you know what happens when a con man walks into a lawyer's office and finds the police already waiting? The door to the truth was about to open, and it would grind Lucas into dust. Lucas's lawyer's office was on the 22nd floor. The place reeked of money and pretense. Lucas walked in like a king about to be crowned. He tossed his briefcase onto the table and gestured for me to sit. His lawyer was already there, a thick stack of documents, ready, full asset power of attorney. "Just sign where the X marks are." "Dad," Lucas said, his voice trembling with excitement. He handed me a gold-plated pen. I took it. My hands shook violently on cue. I glanced at Claire sitting beside me. My daughter kept her head down. She looked like a ghost of herself. My chest tightened again. But I knew I had to stay cold to end this nightmare. I lowered the pen to the paper. Lucas held his breath. He leaned in closer, eyes locked on every movement. One signature, that's all it would take. My house would be his. His debts would have a lifeline. He thought he had already won. But the moment the pen touched the page, I stopped. I looked up straight into his eyes. The confused old man in the worn hoodie was gone. My gaze was sharp now, like a trucker, staring down a hijacker on a dark highway. "Lucas, are you sure you want me to sign this?" I asked, my voice low and steady. He froze. The smile vanished from his face. He tried to recover. "What are you talking about? Just sign it so we can go," he snapped, irritation creeping in. Greed had made him careless. Right then, the meeting room door swung open. Not a secretary with tea. Amelia walked in, followed by 2 older men in black suits. One was a forensic accountant, the other, an inspector from the Economic Crimes Unit. Lucas's face drained of color. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, turning to his lawyer, who looked just as pale. Amelia stepped forward and placed a yellow briefcase on the table right next to Lucas's documents. "This contains evidence of forged signatures, financial fraud, and money laundering through shell accounts," she said clearly. I set the pen down and stood up. No limp, no trembling. I stood tall, solid, unshaken. I looked at Lucas the way a driver looks at debris on the highway. "You really thought I was just a stupid old trucker," I said. "I've driven millions of miles. I've seen every kind of scammer there is. But you made one fatal mistake." I leaned in slightly. "You went after my daughter." Claire lifted her head. She looked at me, then at the documents on the table. Tears began to fall. Lucas lunged toward the yellow briefcase, but the inspector stepped in and stopped him. Everything unraveled in seconds. His confidence shattered. Lucas stammered, unable to form words. He stared at the open briefcase, at the copies of forged signatures, the transaction records, the hidden accounts. But that wasn't all. There was still another briefcase. The one he had been dreaming about. The cream-colored one. Do you want to know what's really inside it? And what could drive Lucas to his knees? In absolute despair. Because the real revenge has only just begun. Lucas stood there like a tree struck by lightning. His face twisted. Arrogance gone, replaced by pure terror. He stared at the yellow briefcase, every crime laid bare. Financial reports. Hidden transaction photos. Forged signatures in Claire's name. Clear as day. I slowly stepped to the center of the conference room. I placed my worn cream-colored briefcase on the table. Two briefcases sat side by side. One held his hell. The other, the future he could have had. Lucas, I said, my voice cold as steel. Look at these two cases. One could have saved your life. The other will end it. The funny thing is, you chose the second one 3 weeks ago. I opened the cream-colored briefcase. Checks. Inheritance documents. $9 million laid bare under the office lights. Claire gasped. She couldn't believe her eyes. Lucas stared at the numbers, his eyes burning with regret and madness. 9 million, he whispered. He lunged toward me, but the officer grabbed his shoulder and held him back. That money belonged to my brother, I said. I was going to use it to pay off your debts. I was going to buy Claire a new home. I was even going to let you manage this investment fund if you had proven yourself to be a good husband. I took a step closer. But you saw me as something to exploit. You saw my daughter as nothing more than a financial tool. He snapped. He started shouting, accusing me of deceiving him, calling me a cruel old man. Then he dropped to his knees, begging, pleading with Claire to forgive him, promising to change, promising to start over. But Claire stood up, and the look in her eyes was pure disgust. She stepped back behind me. She finally saw him for what he truly was. The inspector stepped forward and read the arrest warrant. Lucas was handcuffed on the spot. His downfall came fast like a tire blowout on the highway. Everything was gone. His fake empire exposed. His family shattered. His freedom over. I stood there watching them escort him down the glass hallway. He kept mumbling about the $9 million, still mourning the fortune he lost, not the wife he betrayed. A greedy man stays greedy. I turned and pulled Claire into my arms. She broke down, sobbing against my chest. I'm sorry you had to see this, I whispered, but sometimes you have to burn down a dead forest for something new to grow. This revenge gave me a strange kind of satisfaction. Not like winning a bet. More like delivering a dangerous load safely to its destination. I looked out the window. The Toronto sky was still clear and blue. Lucas was gone from our lives. But this story wasn't over. He was removed. But the wreckage he left behind still remained. The debts in Claire's name, the mortgage papers. I looked at the cream-colored briefcase again. Now, the $9 million would finally serve its true purpose. But could money really heal what had been broken inside my daughter? And what comes next, for a millionaire truck driver? Because in the final chapter, I'm going to reveal one more truth I've kept hidden all along. A secret in Raymond's will that could change Claire's future forever. Let's take this ride to the very last mile. We left the glass building as the sun began to set. The city lights flickered on one by one. Claire sat quietly in my truck. She didn't say a word. She stared out the window, her eyes still red, but the fear was gone. I started the engine. The familiar diesel rumble filled the cabin. Don't worry about the debts, Claire, I said, taking her trembling hand. I used the cream-colored briefcase to clean up everything Lucas left behind. The mortgages are cleared. The credit lines are canceled. You're free now. I drove her across the city to a quiet neighborhood. I stopped in front of a small house with lavender flowers blooming in the yard. This is yours. I placed a new key in her hand. No debt. No lies. This is where you start over and chase your dream of writing. Claire looked at me and broke down again. But this time, they were tears of relief. She finally understood. Family isn't something to be mined. It's something that protects you from the storm. Raymond's $9 million had finally been used the right way. It wasn't just money. It was a lifeline. I watched my daughter step into her new home. A new chapter had begun. As for me, I'd return to the road. I didn't need fancy suits or polished offices. I'm still James, an old truck driver in a worn hoodie drinking cheap coffee. He got the lesson he deserved. Money is just paper. Family is the real treasure. I shifted gears. The truck rolled forward onto the open highway. Ahead of me stretched an endless road, and I had just delivered the most important load of my life. In the end, money is only something you hold in your hands. Family is the only treasure that truly matters. You've just reached the end of this story with Dad's Real Life Revenge. If you think this ending was worth it, hit like and share it. Help spread the lesson about loyalty, family, and justice. Don't forget to subscribe and join our community for more powerful real-life stories. But here's the thing. When I reopened Raymond's will tonight, I found something unexpected. A final clause. One I've never told anyone about. It mentioned a piece of land up north, and it seems Lucas wasn't the only one watching my family. This journey isn't over yet. Do you want to know who's been waiting in the shadows? I'll see you in the next story. I stood outside my son's house on my grandson's birthday. He blocked the doorway and said, "Dad, wait outside. This party is for family only." This winter was colder than usual. The wind cut across my face like a knife. But the cold outside was nothing compared to Desmond's words. My son, the child I had sacrificed my entire life to raise. He stood there leaning against the expensive oak door. A glass of red wine rested in his hand. He looked at me with unfamiliar eyes. The suit he wore was elegant. I recognized the gold cufflinks on his sleeves. They were the gift I had given him when he received his promotion. Now that same arm was pushing me away. "Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. Grab a drink, a snack, get comfortable, and remember this: the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to." Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. The story begins inside the mansion. Soft lo-fi music filled the air. Wealthy guests laughed and chatted warmly. I could hear the footsteps of Lachlan, my 8-year-old grandson, running through the house. I could smell the strawberry cake, the cake I had stood in line to buy since 5 o'clock that morning. The box felt heavy in my hands. The red ribbon had begun to soak through with rain. Desmond glanced at it. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his face. He spoke quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. He said my presence embarrassed him in front of his wife's family. His father-in-law was a wealthy millionaire. I was only a retired schoolteacher wearing a worn-out coat. He had forgotten where the executive chair he sat in had come from. He had forgotten who had paid for the scars of his past mistakes. People often choose to forget a constant once they discover a new variable with greater value. To Desmond, I was a constant that no longer served any purpose. I did not argue. I looked directly into his eyes. His arrogance was important data. I took note of that data. Then I turned and walked away. The door slammed shut behind me. Decisive. Cruel. The sound of the lock echoed through the night. I walked down the granite steps. The snow began falling harder. I did not throw away the cake. I carried it back to my empty house. Desmond's calculation looked perfect on paper, but he had forgotten one thing. Every balanced equation demands a price when one side is wounded. I pulled out my phone. The screen showed no new notifications. I smiled. My silence has always been the beginning of an appropriate punishment. Desmond thought he had won when he closed that door. He had no idea that with his own hands he had just triggered a chain of consequences that could never be reversed. That night I sat down at my desk. I opened my blue notebook. At 11:47 p.m., my phone began exploding with 98 missed calls. 98 missed calls. My phone screen kept flashing in the darkness. A faint blue glow illuminated the strings of numbers. Desmond was panicking. I knew that very well, but I did not swipe the screen to answer. I set the phone back down on the desk face down. Silence is a language that weighs 1,000 pounds. Especially when the person on the other end of the line knows they have made a mistake that cannot be undone. I turned on the old yellow desk lamp. The room filled with a still, quiet light. In front of me lay a blue leather notebook. Its spine had worn thin with time. This was not an emotional diary filled with personal feelings. To me, it was a data archive. Documentation is not revenge. It is evidence of a pattern. In mathematics, an event that happens once may be random. Twice may be unusual. But when it repeats for the 14th time, it becomes a systematic error. It becomes a pattern of betrayal. I turned the pages one by one. The soft rustle of paper echoed through the silent night. Each page marked a point in time. Each point in time was a financial and emotional indictment. I reread the lines written in my own hand. The pain was gone. All that remained was the cold objectivity of a teacher grading a problem that had been wrong from the beginning. November 14th, 2022. Desmond hosted a housewarming party for his first mansion. I brought a Chinese evergreen and wished him peace and prosperity. He told me to leave the plant in a corner of the backyard because he was afraid it would ruin the feng shui design of the living room. March 12, 2024. His wedding anniversary celebration. My name was not on the guest list. Desmond texted me and said the party was only for business partners. September 20th, 2025. I was hospitalized with acute chest pain. The doctor needed a family member to sign the consent forms. I called Desmond 3 times. He did not answer. The next day, he sent a short message. He said he was busy signing a $2 million contract. He said I could take care of myself because I still had health insurance. 14 times. 14 coordinates on a graph showing the decline of morality. Desmond thought his lies were clever. He thought I was a forgetful old man who could easily be fooled by excuses about being busy. But he forgot that I was a mathematician. I do not look at words. I look at the frequency and nature of the data. My son's coldness did not happen in a single day. It was an exponential function tied to the growth of the wealth in his bank account. As his income increased, the value of his father in his eyes decreased in inverse proportion. The phone vibrated again, the 99th time. Desmond was trying to reconnect an equation that had already broken apart. He was beginning to realize that one side of the problem was changing. The white envelope I had given him before leaving was not a desperate letter from a rejected father. Inside that envelope was a piece of information capable of overturning the entire upper-class life he was trying to build. He wanted to know what I was holding. He wanted to know why a retired old school teacher could make his millionaire father-in-law turn pale at the mention of his name. I looked at the blue notebook. I looked at the phone still vibrating across the desk. Desmond still believed this was nothing more than an old man's emotional outburst. He did not yet understand that when a teacher has closed the gradebook, every explanation becomes meaningless. I stood up and opened the old safe in the corner of the room. There was no gold or silver inside. Only a thick file dating back to 2020. The year Desmond had come to his knees before me begging for a lifeline. The file rested neatly in my hands. The papers had faded to a pale yellow over the years. I flipped through receipt copies and checks stamped and verified by the bank. The memories of that year came rushing back immediately. It had been a year of upheaval. It was the moment when the equation of Desmond's life had nearly collapsed to zero. That year, Desmond threw himself into business like a moth rushing toward a flame. He pooled together his money and started a technology distribution company. But the market froze. Supply chains broke down. Business partners walked away. He found himself standing on the edge of bankruptcy. One night in the middle of a torrential rainstorm, Desmond came running to my house. He no longer carried the arrogance he wore today with a glass of wine in his hand. He dropped to his knees on my living room floor, his knees pressed into the old worn carpet. He cried desperately. He said that if he could not come up with $370,000 within 48 hours, he would face prison because of debt and insolvency. He would lose everything. $370,000. For an old math teacher, it was an enormous amount of money. It was every dollar I had received from selling the ancestral home left to me in the suburbs. It was my entire retirement savings accumulated over 35 years of teaching. Desmond looked at me with pleading eyes. He promised to repay every cent. He promised to take care of me when I grew old and weak. I did not hesitate. I did not create a balance sheet to determine whether I would profit or lose. That is what fathers do. We do not ask whether the price is fair. We only ask whether the equation works. My calculation at the time was very simple. On one side stood my entire life savings. On the other stood my son's future and his honor. I chose the second side. I signed the paperwork to withdraw my retirement funds in a lump sum. I sold the piece of family land filled with memories. I transferred the entire $370,000 into Desmond's account. I willingly moved into this cramped rental apartment. Desmond took that money and soared. He saved his company. He met Wallace Ashford. He married Simone. He stepped into high society. He began buying mansions and trading up to luxury cars. But as his net worth increased, he began performing a different calculation on the past. He searched for ways to reduce the value of the debt he owed. He started treating that $370,000 as an obvious obligation any father should have fulfilled. He forgot that the money had not fallen from the sky. It was sweat. It was sacrifice. It was an entire lifetime spent standing at a classroom chalkboard. I ran my hand across the old file. Numbers do not lie. Desmond believed he had repaid his debt with a few inexpensive holiday gifts. He thought a father's sacrifice could be assigned a cash value and then erased from the ledger. But he was wrong. The nature of a debt never truly disappears. It only changes from one form into another. Desmond forgot an extremely important detail from that rainy night. When he received the money, he was in too much of a hurry. He signed a stack of documents that my best friend and I had prepared. He never carefully read the attached terms. He had no idea that behind those $370,000 a legal trap had already been activated. That trap was called Clause 14. I set down the file from 2020. Then I pulled out a document bearing an official red seal across its pages. It was the formal loan agreement. It had been drafted by attorney Thaddeus. Thaddeus had been my university classmate. He was a specialist in corporate financial law, a man with a cold mind and the precision of a computer. That night, Desmond signed this document without the slightest hesitation. He was overwhelmed with relief at having the money that would save him. He flipped through the pages in seconds. He signed every blank line blindly. All he saw was the $370,000 that was about to be deposited into his account. He never noticed the hidden variable buried on page 11. That variable was Clause 14. In the world of financial attorneys, provisions like this are known as hidden nuclear weapons. Thaddeus had foreseen Desmond's ingratitude. He understood the psychology of people who become wealthy too quickly. When people reach the top, they often want to erase the traces of those who lifted them out of the mud. Thaddeus once told me that a father's love was a constant in my heart, but for Desmond it was a variable that could change according to greed. We needed an insurance equation. Clause 14 was very clear. The $370,000 was not a non-refundable gift. It was a convertible loan carrying a penalty interest rate if repayment was overdue by more than 5 years. The contract deadline was October 31st, 2025. Today was already 2026. Desmond was more than 6 months past due. What was the consequence of that default? Desmond had absolutely no idea. He believed that at worst I would demand the return of the $370,000 plus a little bank interest. He owned a company worth millions of dollars. He had a luxurious mansion and wealthy friends. He was confident he had enough money to throw in my face if I pushed the matter too far. But mathematics does not work that simply. Clause 14 stated that if the borrower violated the repayment deadline, the entire principal balance and penalty interest would automatically be converted into direct ownership shares of Desmond's company, not at its current market value, but at the book valuation from 2020 when his company had been worth almost nothing. That meant I was not demanding money. I was demanding ownership. According to Thaddeus's precise calculations, the original $370,000 from 2020 combined with the accumulating penalty interest over the past 6 months was now equivalent to 49% of the controlling shares in Desmond's company. I was about to become the largest shareholder, the person holding the power of life and death in the place of which he was most proud. I folded the contract. I placed it inside my old leather briefcase. Tomorrow, Thaddeus would send an official notice to Desmond's office. My son was about to face a test he could never cheat on, but I knew Desmond was not alone in this game. Behind his arrogance stood the shadow of Wallace Ashford, his father-in-law, a true old fox of the financial world. Wallace had taught Desmond how to dismiss and look down on this poor old father. But Wallace did not know that he had accidentally pushed his own son-in-law into an exponential function of destruction, and Wallace himself had already become a factor within its range. Wallace Ashford. In the business world, he was a true hunter, a man who believed that everything in life could be assigned a cash value. When Desmond married Simone Wallace's daughter, he looked at me with open disdain. He looked at my worn-out coat. He looked at the old car I drove. He told Desmond that coming from a poor family of educators was a weakness on his professional profile. He taught my son to use shame as a tool to sever his connection to the past. Desmond learned quickly. He began dodging his debt. He ignored the Friday evenings when he was supposed to make payments toward the principal he owed me. He started following his father-in-law's advice, channeling all available cash flow into a massive $2.1 million deal. This deal was supposed to be the launching pad that would take his company public. Wallace promised to invest if Desmond could demonstrate the decisiveness of a true executive. Ironically, that decisiveness turned out to be pushing his father out of the equation of his life. Greed always operates as an exponential function. When people have 1, they want 10. When they have 10, they want 100. Desmond believed he was controlling the game, but he forgot that I was a teacher. I do not merely look at the answers on a test. I look at how those answers were obtained. Last week, through several former students who now work in auditing, I obtained a set of internal documents. Desmond was deceiving investors. To qualify for Wallace's $2.1 million deal, he had falsified financial statements. He had inflated the previous quarter's revenue to 3 times its actual amount. This was no longer an ordinary error. This was securities fraud. A criminal offense. I sat alone in the dark room, turning page after page of the falsified documents signed by my own son. Disappointment rose inside me like a stream of icy water. I had taught him how to solve difficult problems. I had never taught him how to manipulate the answers. Desmond was standing at the top of a house of cards. One gentle gust of wind would bring down his entire career, reputation, and luxurious lifestyle. Wallace Ashford believed he was the apex predator in this deal. He believed he was leading Desmond by the nose and preparing to swallow his company whole. But neither of them knew one critical piece of information. The contract containing Clause 14 that I held carried greater legal authority than any of their current investment agreements. My 49% ownership stake granted me complete veto power over this $2.1 million transaction. Tomorrow morning, when the market opens, Desmond will submit his listing application. He believes it will be the most glorious day of his life. But he has no idea that an unpredictable witness has just entered the equation. A young witness, one who possesses a missing piece capable of detonating the entire media bomb before I ever have to use the law. Desmond and Wallace believed they had carefully calculated every angle. They controlled the cash flow. They controlled the media. They controlled the investors. But they could not control an 8-year-old child. My grandson, Lachlan. That afternoon, while I stood outside the door in the snow and rain, the boy was sitting in the living room. He was holding a newly purchased iPad. He was testing its audio filtering feature by recording a video. The expensive oak front door could not block the device's sensitive microphone. The entire conversation between Desmond and me was recorded without missing a single word. Desmond's cold voice, the wind whistling through the crack in the door, his cruel rejection of his elderly father, the cake box soaked by the rain. Every sound was captured in the child's accidental recording. The 8-year-old knew it was wrong, but the 41-year-old man still had not realized it. Lachlan did not fully understand the meaning of his father's words. But he saw his grandfather walk away in the rain. He saw his father slam the door shut in anger. He pressed the save button. After that, the video was automatically backed up to the family's shared iCloud account. It was an automatic synchronization feature, a simple algorithm with no emotions. It merely performed its task of copying data from one device to another. At 11 o'clock that night, Simone, Desmond's wife, opened her computer to review photos from their son's birthday party. Instead of cheerful photographs, the screen displayed Lachlan's 30-second video. Simone sat frozen at her vanity table. She was not greedy like Wallace. She was a mother. She understood the meaning of family bonds. The naked truth revealed in the clip sent a chill through her. The man she had lived with for 10 years was far colder than she had ever imagined. Simone began questioning everything. She questioned the origin of the $370,000 that had saved the company during its crisis years earlier. She questioned why Desmond always found ways to avoid the subject whenever she suggested inviting me over to visit. The data had been exposed, and it created a deep crack in Simone's confidence and trust. At the same time, I also received a copy on my phone. I sat and watched the video play across the screen. I was not angry. I knew that what was meant to come would come. I turned off the phone. I placed the contract containing Clause 14 into a pristine white envelope. I included no note. Not a single word. I sent it by overnight courier to Desmond's office that very night. My son believed that tomorrow would be the day he reached the pinnacle of glory with his $2.1 million deal. He had no idea that when he walked into his office, a brutal financial autopsy would be waiting for him on his desk. Late at night. The lights were still on in Desmond's office on the 34th floor. He sat alone in front of the gleaming glass windows, looking down at the city flooded with headlights and neon lights. Tomorrow was the big day. The day his company would officially go public. Everything had been scheduled perfectly. He should have been celebrating with Wallace, but a bad feeling kept him from leaving the office. At 11:47 p.m., the white envelope I had sent by overnight courier was sitting on his desk. The building security guard had delivered it about 10 minutes earlier. Desmond stared at the envelope. There was no sender's name, only the seal of Thaddeus's law firm. He used a silver letter opener to slice it open. Inside was not an emotional letter of disappointment from an elderly father. Inside was a financial autopsy. It was a 20-page document. The first page was a summary of the loan from 2020. The figure of $370,000 was printed in bold black ink. Desmond turned to the next page. The color began draining from his face. The numbers seemed to dance before his eyes. Accumulating penalty interest. 6 months of delinquency. And finally Clause 14 quoted in full with his own signature beneath it. Desmond frantically flipped to the last page. There he found the share conversion calculation prepared by Thaddeus, 49% ownership of the company. Complete control over the current board structure resting in my hands. The $2.1 million deal with Wallace Ashford instantly became worthless paper without my approval and signature. The falsified financial report he was preparing to submit to the stock exchange had also been attached by Thaddeus as supporting evidence, along with a stern warning regarding securities fraud. Sweat began rolling down Desmond's forehead. He grabbed the phone on his desk. His hands shook so badly that he nearly dropped it. He dialed my number. The first call. The ringtone echoed through my empty apartment. I watched the screen light up but did not answer. The second call. The 10th. The 50th. Then 98 missed calls. He knew I was looking at the phone. He knew I was deliberately remaining silent. The silence of a teacher, while a student realizes that he solved the test incorrectly from the very first step. There is no opportunity to correct a paper that has already been turned in. He finally realized that the worn coat of the father he had thrown out earlier that afternoon was now the very thing capable of taking away the entire kingdom he possessed. If you've followed the story this far, then you may be finding it interesting. Please do us a quick favor. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've made it this far, and predict how the story will end to see if your guess is correct. Many people watch without doing that, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Desmond could no longer sit still. He grabbed his coat and rushed out of the office. He needed to find Wallace Ashford. His millionaire father-in-law was the only lifeline he could think of. He believed Wallace's power and money could crush an old schoolteacher and an aging attorney, but Desmond did not know that Wallace was holding another document in his hands. A document capable of stripping away my entire pension and driving me into ruin. This confrontation had just evolved into a new equation, one far more complicated than before. 8 o'clock the next morning. Attorney Thaddeus's office was filled with the light of the morning sun, but the atmosphere inside was ice cold. Wallace Ashford sat arrogantly on a leather sofa. Desmond stood quietly behind him. His face looked exhausted after a sleepless night. Wallace showed no sign of panic. He wore a smug smile. He placed a thin file on the glass table. Wallace looked at me with the eyes of a man who believed himself superior. He said that my 49% ownership stake was an impressive number. But mathematics only has value when a person still has the right to remain in the game. He pushed the file toward me. Inside was a report from the IRS. Wallace had used his influence to dig for flaws. He had discovered an error in my tax records from 3 years earlier. An amount of income from private tutoring had not been fully reconciled. The figure was $22,000. Wallace threatened me. He said that if I did not sign an agreement surrendering my 49% ownership stake for $0, he would submit the document to the IRS. I would face a criminal tax investigation. The remainder of my pension would be frozen. The honor of a teacher with 35 years of service would disappear into nothing. Wallace believed he had found a variable capable of completely eliminating my equation. He was betting on an old school teacher's lack of understanding of complicated financial regulations. Desmond looked at me. A cruel spark of hope flashed in his eyes. He thought his father-in-law had won. He thought my worn-out coat would once again be forced to bow before the power of money. I looked at the tax file. I was not afraid. A good teacher is never surprised by a trick question from a troublesome student. I turned toward Thaddeus. Thaddeus smiled slightly and opened his leather briefcase. He placed an original receipt on the table bearing the red seal of the United States Treasury. November 10th, 2023. It was a receipt for a voluntary supplemental tax payment. 3 years earlier, Thaddeus himself had discovered the $22,000 discrepancy while helping me complete the paperwork for selling my house. I had voluntarily paid the penalty and settled the entire amount, including late payment interest, long before Wallace had ever learned of its existence. My tax record was completely clean. Wallace's counterattack failed completely. The arrogant expression on his face immediately twisted. The smile vanished from his lips. The documents in his hands had become nothing more than a harmless joke. He had calculated an equation using outdated and inaccurate data. Desmond completely fell apart. He realized that his only lifeline had just exploded. But that was not all. Thaddeus stood up. He produced an official ultimatum. If Desmond did not sign the transfer order for the 49% ownership stake before noon today, we would submit his falsified financial statements to the Securities Commission. The office door suddenly swung open. Simone walked in. In her hand was her son's iPad. There was not a trace of affection left in her eyes as she looked at Desmond. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The snowstorm outside had stopped, but the cold still lingered throughout my cramped rental apartment. There was a knock at the door. Hesitant, uncertain, I opened it. Desmond stood there. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His normally well-groomed hair hung across his forehead. His eyes were red from panic and despair. He had not come with Wallace. Wallace had abandoned him the moment he realized the $2.1 million deal had turned into a financial black hole. Desmond stepped inside. He looked around the simple apartment. He looked at the old particle board dining table. Then he dropped to his knees once again. Just like that rainy night in 2020. He cried. He begged me to sign the waiver agreement for the Securities Commission. He said that if I did not save him, he would lose everything. Simone was filing for divorce and seeking custody of their son. The company would collapse. He would go to prison. I did not say a word. I walked into the small kitchen. I turned on the gas stove. A blue flame sprang to life. I placed a small pot of water on the burner. Then I took out 2 packages of inexpensive instant noodles. The same meal we had eaten throughout the years when he was a struggling college student. Back then, I always gave him the only meatballs in the bowl. Desmond watched me cook. The sound of boiling water filled the suffocating silence. I placed 2 steaming bowls of noodles on the table. I pushed one toward him. I told him to eat. Desmond stared at the bowl. Tears dripped into the broth. He said he was in no state of mind to eat noodles right now. Calmly, I picked up my chopsticks. I told him that an empty mind cannot solve difficult problems. If you want to correct a mistake, you must first be clear-headed enough to see where the error lies. I looked at my guilty son. My heart tightened, but my face remained as calm as a teacher standing at the front of a classroom. Punishment does not change people. Understanding does. I was not using Clause 14 to destroy him, nor was I submitting his falsified financial reports to the authorities. If I did that, I would only be proving that I was successful at revenge. But I was a father. I was a teacher. My goal was to correct the mistakes on his exam, not tear the exam paper apart. I pushed the share conversion documents toward Desmond. I told him I would sign an order freezing the 49% ownership stake in order to protect the company's assets from creditors. I would save him from prison. But on one condition. He had to personally submit his resignation as chief executive officer. He had to solve this debt problem himself, starting from the most basic numbers. He had to relearn how to be an honest human being before learning how to be a millionaire. Desmond looked at me in shock. He was finally beginning to understand the true nature of the punishment. I was not taking away his money. I was taking away the arrogance that had blinded him for so many years. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed the resignation agreement. He had chosen to face the error in his life. Desmond left my home after night had fallen. He walked away carrying a heavy burden on his shoulders, but his steps were steadier than before. The lesson had been learned. The equation now had a new path toward a solution. But just as I was about to close the door, my phone received a message from Thaddeus. A final development had just been recorded at the county property registration office. Simone had made an extreme decision that even surprised me. Simone's decision came as a great surprise. She used her entire share of the assets from the divorce settlement to fully repay the original $370,000 debt to me. She did not want her son to grow up carrying the shame of having a father who refused to repay what he owed. Simone's action officially reduced the debt side of the equation to zero. 6 months later, this year's winter was finally coming to an end. Warm spring sunlight began filtering through the windows. Today was Sunday. I stood by the window of my apartment looking down at the walkway below the building. The path had been cleared of snow and carefully salted to prevent slipping. That was something Desmond had quietly been doing for the past 3 months. Every Sunday morning, before I woke up, he no longer drove luxury cars. He wore simple work clothes. The arrogance he once carried had disappeared. In its place were calmness and patience. A knock sounded at the door. Exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I opened it. Desmond stood there with Simone and my grandson Lachlan. They carried a basket of fruit and ingredients for dinner. There were no formal pleasantries, no expensive glasses of wine, and no upper-class pretenses. Desmond looked at me. The sincerity he had lost 10 years ago had returned to his eyes. He lowered his head respectfully. He called me Dad with genuine respect. Our first Sunday dinner after so many storms passed in a warm and peaceful atmosphere. At last, the equation of our lives had found a balanced solution. Desmond had accepted a fresh start at a small company in an ordinary employee position. Self-respect does not come from winning. It comes from how you fight. I watched my son correct the mistakes in his life, one by one. For a father, that was the greatest reward. Understanding had healed the wounds left by betrayal. Thank you for joining Dad's Real Life Revenge. Don't forget to share your story in the comments and click like and subscribe so you won't miss the next valuable lesson. I want to leave you with one thought. In life, money and status are only temporary variables. They come and go with the changing tides of time. Only family bonds and personal integrity remain true constants. Never erase from your life the people who sacrificed everything to lift you out of the mud simply because of numbers in a bank account. Every moral error carries a cost, and every error in character will eventually be balanced by a harsh equation of cause and consequence. I was standing in the grand marble lobby of the five-star hotel called the Cloister. 2 massive security guards gripped my shoulders tightly as they dragged me toward the front entrance under the disgusted stares of wealthy guests. My clothes were torn apart. Across my old suit jacket spread a large, dark bloodstain that had already dried. I looked less like a father attending his son's wedding and more like a criminal who had wandered into a palace by mistake. Across the lobby stood Felicity and Carlton, my son's rich in-laws, staring at me with open contempt. Felicity lifted her hand to cover her nose, as if my mere presence polluted the air around her. My son Bradley stood frozen behind them. He could not even look his own father in the eye. He chose silence to protect the pride of his wife's family. They threw me out because of the blood on my shirt. But they had no idea that blood was worth $9 million they were about to lose. My sons-in-laws had looked down on me my entire life. To them, I was nothing more than a retired water department worker from the bottom of society. They believed their money could buy everything, including human dignity. They were wrong. Exactly 15 minutes later, a powerful woman stepped out of a luxury car and walked into that hotel lobby. The moment she appeared, everyone who had mocked me began to tremble. And what she said to them that night is a story I will tell my grandchildren until the day I die. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Real Life. Grab yourself a drink, maybe a snack, settle in comfortably, and remember this. The people in these stories always had the chance to do the right thing. They simply chose not to. Subscribe for more intense family drama stories. And before we begin, tell me which state or city you are watching from tonight. Life is strange sometimes. The people who speak the loudest about morality and kindness often carry the darkest hearts. They wear elegant clothes and sparkling diamonds, while their character rots underneath. Meanwhile, true kindness is often hidden beneath worn-out jackets and rough hands stained by years of honest work. This story is not about showing off wealth or power. It is about the price of arrogance and the reward waiting for a compassionate heart. Let me take you back to the beginning of that day. Everything started with a phone call from my son filled with pride and condescension. That morning began with the sharp ringing of a telephone. It shattered the silence inside my small, lonely house. The moment I saw Bradley's name glowing on the screen, my heart tightened painfully. My son had not called home in 3 months. His voice came through the speaker, cold and distant. There was no question about my health. No concern about how his old father had been living lately. He went straight to the point with a hurried tone filled with pressure. Tonight was the 25th wedding anniversary celebration for his wealthy in-laws, the Halverson Beauchamp family. A grand event held at the most luxurious 5-star hotel in the city. Bradley hesitated for a few seconds before saying something that made my chest feel heavy. He told me I did not need to dress too formally. A sports jacket would be good enough for me. It sounded like harmless advice. But I understood the real meaning behind those words immediately. It was a quiet insult aimed at my social status. My son was ashamed of me. He feared that my old age and modest appearance would embarrass him in front of his rich wife's family. He was terrified that I might ruin the perfect image he had worked so hard to create. After the call ended, I sat motionless on my worn-out sofa. The house felt unbearably empty. Ever since Helen, my beloved wife, passed away, loneliness had become my only companion. I lifted my eyes toward our wedding photograph hanging on the wall. Helen's gentle smile seemed to comfort me even now. I walked into the kitchen to make a piece of toast. The old toaster suddenly sparked and began burning the bread black while smoke filled the room. The bitter smell spread through the kitchen like the darkness that had settled over my life. I coughed violently and rushed to open the windows wide. Outside, a small cardinal rested on a tree branch. It chirped cheerfully before soaring freely into the open sky. I watched the bird for a long moment before lowering my eyes to my rough, weathered hands. Hands that had spent 38 years working honestly for the city water department. I wondered when honesty and hard work had become something children were ashamed of. The loneliness in my chest rose painfully into my throat. But for Bradley's happiness, I convinced myself to endure it. I walked to my closet and took out the best suit I owned. A black suit with worn shoulders but carefully pressed and spotless. Then I placed $200 of savings into an envelope. It was a small gift meant to honor my sons-in-laws and bless their celebration. I stepped out of my house with a calm heart, completely unaware of what awaited me ahead. I did not know that this journey would drag me into a life or death situation. When 27 luxury cars drove past the accident scene without stopping, only one old Buick pulled over, and that was the moment fate changed everything. What happened on that lonely road that forced me to sacrifice even my dignity? I drove my old Buick toward the anniversary party, but my mind was crowded with bitter memories of my son's wealthy in-laws. The Halverson Beauchamp family lived in a world completely different from mine. Carlton was a famous cosmetic surgeon who catered to the rich and powerful. Felicity spent her days organizing charity galas for royal thoroughbred horses. They owned enormous mansions, attended elite social events, and surrounded themselves with influential people. To them, a retired water department worker like me was nothing more than a stain on their family reputation. Every time our paths crossed, they treated me like an unwanted shadow. My poverty was in their eyes some contagious disease that might infect their polished image. I still remembered the very first time our families met. Felicity looked me up and down with cold judgment in her eyes. Then she stepped closer and lifted one finger covered in diamonds to inspect the collar of my shirt. The gesture was cruel and humiliating, as though she were checking an animal for parasites. She clicked her tongue softly before turning to her daughter and muttering that some people could never hide where they came from, no matter how hard they tried. Carlton stood beside her with a smug half-smile stretched across his face. That day I swallowed every ounce of humiliation for Bradley's future. Tonight felt no different. I knew I was driving straight into a lion's den. I glanced down at my old suit and then toward the envelope containing $200 resting on the passenger seat. That money came from months of careful saving from my tiny pension checks. To those rich people, $200 was probably less than the cost of a single bottle of wine at their celebration. But to me it represented sincerity, respect, and a father's blessing. I kept telling myself that kindness and honesty could bridge any distance between rich and poor. I hoped that if they saw my genuine heart, they might treat Bradley with more respect and compassion. My old Buick rolled slowly down Highway 17, while light rain began falling across the windshield. Thick fog spread over the empty road and blurred everything ahead of me. The highway looked uncertain and dangerous, just like the storm waiting in my future. I turned on the radio to escape the heaviness crushing my chest. But even the soft melody playing through the speakers could not calm the growing sense of dread inside me. I had no idea that only minutes later on this lonely stretch of road something horrifying was about to happen. An event that would test my humanity and expose the true faces of people who called themselves noble. Then suddenly the violent screech of tires echoed through the fog, followed by a deafening explosion in the distance. The explosion ripped through the silence of Highway 17 like thunder tearing open the night sky. I slammed on the brakes, and my old Buick skidded across the rain-soaked pavement. About 50 yards ahead of me, a luxury SUV had flipped onto its side near the ditch. Thick black smoke poured from beneath the crumpled hood, while flames slowly began spreading underneath the vehicle. The headlights pointed upward into the fog, casting weak, trembling beams into the darkness. I threw open my car door and rushed out into the storm. Rain lashed against my face, freezing cold, but I barely felt it. My chest pounded violently with fear. From inside the wreckage came the horrifying screams of a woman crying for help. Her voice cracked with desperation as she shouted that her daughter was still trapped in the back seat. For several seconds I stood frozen. Then I noticed headlights approaching from behind me. One luxury car after another raced down the highway toward the city. They could clearly see the accident. They could hear the screams. Yet not a single car slowed down. The first car sped past. Then the second. The third. The fourth. Every driver pressed harder on the gas as if terrified that compassion might inconvenience them. They did not want blood or smoke near their expensive cars. They did not want a roadside tragedy to delay their glamorous dinners and private parties. I counted them silently with growing bitterness. 27 luxury cars passed by without stopping. 27 people chose comfort over human life. The cruelty of it sent a chill deeper through me than the rain ever could. At that moment, instinct took over. For 5 years I had cared for my late wife Helen during her epilepsy attacks. I knew what panic looked like. I knew how quickly seconds could become the difference between life and death. If I wasted time now, the SUV could explode, or the child could suffocate from the smoke. I could not stand there like the other 27 selfish strangers. I forgot about my clean press suit. I forgot about the anniversary party. I forgot about the wealthy family waiting to judge me. I ran straight toward the burning vehicle. Mud splashed across my shoes while shattered glass crunched beneath every step. When I reached the back door, I saw it had been twisted completely out of shape. Through the cracked window, I could barely make out a little girl around 5 years old. She was crying weakly, her tiny face pale from fear and lack of oxygen. Her mother, trapped in the front seat, was desperately trying to reach back toward her, but one of her legs was pinned beneath the dashboard. I grabbed the rear door handle with both hands and pulled with every ounce of strength left in my 60-year-old body. Metal shrieked violently beneath my grip, but the door did not move at all. Smoke from the engine poured thicker into the cabin. The little girl started coughing harder. Her cries became weaker and weaker. Below the SUV, the fire suddenly flared brighter, and in that terrifying moment I realized I had only one final chance to save that child before it was too late. I grabbed a large rock from the side of the road and smashed it against the SUV window with all my strength. The glass exploded into thousands of sharp fragments. Without hesitating, I shoved my arm through the broken opening while jagged pieces sliced into my skin. Pain burned through my hand, but I ignored it completely. I reached inside, unlocked the door, and yanked it open with every ounce of strength left in me. Thick poisonous smoke burst out of the cabin, making me cough violently. I leaned inside the burning vehicle and pulled the little girl into my arms just seconds before flames reached the back seat. Holding her tightly against my chest, I ran nearly 30 feet away from the SUV. The moment I stopped, a small explosion thundered behind us. I gently laid the child down on the rain-soaked grass beside the highway. Without thinking twice, I removed my carefully pressed suit jacket and rolled it into a pillow beneath her head. Her name was Caitlin. She was gasping for breath while her tiny body trembled uncontrollably from fear. Blood from a cut on her forehead mixed with mud and wet grass all over my clothes. My white shirt was now stained with dark blood and dirt. But none of that mattered to me. I held Caitlin's small, trembling hand and spoke to her as softly as I could. I told her everything was all right now. I told her she was safe. Her mother, Genevieve, had finally managed to crawl out through the front door of the SUV. The moment she reached her daughter, she collapsed beside her and wrapped the little girl in her arms while sobbing uncontrollably. She kept thanking me over and over again, between desperate breaths. In the distance, the sound of approaching ambulance sirens cut through the rain. Suddenly, Genevieve remembered something important. She handed me an expensive designer handbag and begged me to hold on to it while she rode with Caitlin to the hospital. She explained that it contained extremely important documents. Then the paramedics rushed them away. I stood alone in the pouring rain, watching the ambulance disappear into the darkness. For a moment, I looked at my reflection in the side mirror of my old Buick. My hair was soaked and disheveled. My clothes were torn apart and covered in mud and blood. I pulled out my phone to check the time, and my stomach dropped instantly. I was already more than an hour late for the anniversary party. Panicked, I climbed back into my Buick and drove straight toward the cloister. I had no idea that my appearance would soon turn me into the center of a horrifying nightmare. I was about to face the cruelest humiliation of my life from the very people who called themselves family. How would those polished, wealthy elites react when a blood-covered old man walked into the middle of their glamorous celebration? I pulled my old Buick up in front of the grand entrance of the cloister. Crystal chandeliers glowed through the massive windows, spilling golden light across the marble driveway like something out of a dream. I stepped out of the car, still holding the stranger's handbag tightly in my hand. The valet attendant looked me up and down with open disgust. He did not even bother walking over to take my keys. Instead, he crossed his arms and loudly demanded that I move my wreck of a car somewhere else before it ruined the appearance of the entrance. I ignored him completely. Without saying a word, I hurried through the revolving glass doors and entered the hotel lobby. The sound of my worn shoes striking the polished marble floor echoed awkwardly through the elegant ballroom. The moment I stepped inside, a chilling silence spread across the room. Even the soft classical music seemed to fade away. Every guest, dressed in designer suits and sparkling gowns, slowly turned to stare at me. Then the whispering began. Cruel whispers. Mocking whispers. They looked at me as if I were some filthy creature that had wandered in from another world to contaminate their perfect evening. I saw fingers pointing toward my blood-stained clothes. I saw smug smiles curling across faces hidden behind champagne glasses. These people called themselves refined and noble, yet their eyes dripped with cruelty, and no one looked more horrified than my sons-in-laws. From across the ballroom, Felicity spotted me, and her face instantly turned bright red with humiliation and rage. The wineglass in her hand trembled violently. She could not believe that her son-in-law's father had dared to appear at her prestigious celebration looking like this. Carlton stormed toward me with fury burning in his eyes. He never once asked if I was hurt. He never asked what had happened. Instead, he grabbed my arm aggressively and squeezed so hard it felt like my bones might crack. He dragged me across the ballroom as if I were a dangerous lunatic being removed from a public place. Bradley followed closely behind us, his face pale with panic. But he said nothing. Not one word to defend his own father. He stood there watching Carlton humiliate me in front of everyone without opening his mouth even once. That silence wounded me more deeply than all the cruelty from strangers. Carlton shoved me into a deserted hallway near the service storage rooms. He stood in front of me like a judge preparing to sentence a criminal. Then he pointed angrily at the bloodstains covering my shirt. What came out of his mouth next would ignite a vicious confrontation that pushed every ounce of pain and humiliation inside me to the breaking point. Carlton stepped closer until his face was only inches from mine. His breath reeked of expensive whiskey. Through clenched teeth, he demanded to know what kind of disgraceful stunt I thought I was pulling. He asked if I had any idea how important this night was for his family. Felicity stormed out into the hallway beside him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest with absolute disgust written across her face. She said I looked like a homeless beggar dragged out of a garbage dump. Then she pointed at the bloodstains covering my shirt and shouted that my filthy appearance was ruining the expensive carpets of the cloister. She proudly announced that the mayor himself and some of the most powerful businessmen in the city were attending tonight's celebration. According to her, the presence of a shabby retired water department worker like me was an insult to everyone in that ballroom. I turned desperately toward Bradley, hoping my son would finally show even a shred of understanding. I explained that there had been an accident on the highway. I told him I had just saved a little girl's life. But Bradley lowered his head in shame. Then he quietly asked why I had not gone home to change clothes before coming to the party. He said I was humiliating him. He said he did not even know how to face his wife's parents anymore because of me. Those words cut through my heart like a knife. I had sacrificed my entire life to raise that boy, and now he was ashamed of the father who gave him everything. Carlton refused to let me explain another word. He snapped his fingers and called over 2 massive hotel security guards. In a cold, furious voice, he ordered them to throw me out immediately. He declared that filthy, poor people like me had no right to breathe the same air as respectable, upper-class guests. The guards grabbed both of my shoulders and dragged me across the lobby while guests gathered near the entrance to watch the humiliation unfold. Some whispered, some laughed. Others stared at me with cruel amusement, as if I were entertainment for the evening. The guards shoved me through the revolving doors so violently that I crashed onto the cold stone steps outside the hotel entrance. The stranger's designer handbag flew from my hands and landed beside me in the pouring rain. If you feel furious for Mr. Hollis right now, leave a like and comment the number 1 to support kindness and humanity. I sat alone on the wet stone steps beneath the heavy rain. Water streamed down my face, mixing with tears of humiliation and heartbreak. I could not stop asking myself when kindness had become a crime. How could a man who had just saved a child's life be treated like a criminal by his own family? I stared at the expensive handbag lying abandoned beside me. Part of me wanted to stand up, get back into my old Buick, and drive away forever without ever seeing my cowardly son again. But the moment my fingers touched the handle of the bag, the sharp scream of brakes echoed across the entrance driveway. A black Rolls-Royce stopped directly in front of the hotel. The rear door slowly opened, and a powerful woman stepped out into the rain. That single moment was about to change everything and ignite a devastating reckoning none of them would ever forget. The woman stepped out of the black Rolls-Royce with urgency written all over her face. It was Genevieve Ashworth. Her designer dress was still stained with rainwater and mud from the accident scene. Though worry clouded her expression, her presence radiated the unmistakable authority of someone used to commanding entire rooms with a single glance. The moment she saw me sitting on the freezing stone steps in torn, blood-stained clothes, she stopped abruptly. Shock flashed across her face before turning into cold fury as she noticed the 2 security guards still standing nearby, watching me like a dangerous criminal. Genevieve hurried toward me without hesitation. She bent down and personally helped me to my feet. Then she picked up her handbag and carefully supported my arm with genuine respect. Her voice trembled with disbelief as she asked why the man who had saved her granddaughter's life was sitting outside in the rain like this. I remained silent. I only looked through the glass doors toward the ballroom inside. At that exact moment, Felicity and Carlton rushed out of the hotel entrance, eager to welcome their wealthy, distinguished guest. They had assumed Genevieve Ashworth arrived to attend their anniversary celebration. But the moment they saw her standing beside me, their arrogant smiles disappeared instantly. Their faces turned pale. Carlton quickly tried to explain himself. Stammering nervously, he claimed that I was merely some unstable homeless man who had sneaked into the party and caused trouble. He insisted they had removed me only to protect the safety and dignity of the guests. Felicity immediately joined in, saying my filthy appearance would have contaminated the entire evening. Genevieve did not even let them finish speaking. She turned sharply toward them, her eyes colder than steel. Then she tightened her grip on my arm and delivered a sentence that struck them like lightning. She announced that this so-called filthy old man had risked his own life to pull her granddaughter from a burning vehicle, while 27 other luxury cars drove past without stopping. Silence crashed over the entrance. Without another word, Genevieve guided me back toward the grand ballroom of the cloister. The same 2 security guards who had thrown me out moments earlier now lowered their heads in shame, too terrified to say a single word. Felicity and Carlton followed behind us with trembling steps. The full weight of Genevieve Ashworth's identity was finally beginning to settle over the room. She was not an ordinary woman. She was the largest diamond-level donor behind the International Medical Center project Carlton desperately wanted attached to his name and career. And now the most satisfying reckoning imaginable was about to unfold in front of 300 wealthy guests standing frozen inside the ballroom. What would Genevieve Ashworth do next to expose the true faces hiding behind all that luxury and prestige? Genevieve Ashworth led me straight into the center of the magnificent ballroom. The moment we entered, all 300 wealthy guests fell completely silent. Every eye in the room locked onto the most powerful woman in the city, walking beside an old man covered in blood, mud, and torn clothing. Behind us, Carlton and Felicity followed like ghosts. Their faces had gone completely pale. Genevieve climbed onto the stage and took hold of the microphone. Her voice rang through the grand ballroom, sharp, powerful, and impossible to ignore. She announced to every guest present that Mr. Hollis was the greatest benefactor the Ashworth family could ever ask for. She declared that I had risked my own life to save her granddaughter Caitlin from a vehicle moments away from exploding while 27 luxury cars chose to drive past and ignore a dying child. A wave of shocked whispers spread across the room. Then Genevieve slowly turned toward Carlton and Felicity. The disgust in her eyes was unmistakable. In front of everyone, she publicly canceled the entire $9 million donation intended for Carlton's new international hospital project. Her words struck like hammers against their pride. She said the people hoping to carve their names into a hospital building possessed hearts far too ugly to deserve such honor. A cosmetic surgeon who constantly preached beauty and compassion had just thrown out a kind old father because of bloodstains on his shirt. A woman who spent fortunes rescuing thoroughbred horses had valued a luxury hotel carpet more than the life of a frightened little girl. Money, she said, could build beautiful towers and elegant foundations, but it could never purchase humanity. The ballroom erupted into whispers once again, but this time the whispers were filled with shame and disgust toward the Halverson Beauchamp family. Guests quietly stepped farther away from Carlton and Felicity as though humiliation itself were contagious. Carlton stood frozen on the stage, his lips trembling helplessly. The reputation and prestige he had spent decades building collapsed around him in a single night. Felicity covered her face while tears streamed down her cheeks as the same judgmental eyes she once used against others now turned mercilessly upon her. Every layer of their polished fake image had been ripped apart beneath the bright ballroom lights. From the corner of the room, Bradley stared at me with overwhelming shame and regret burning in his eyes. Seeing that late realization inside my son made me release a quiet, exhausted sigh. Whitney stepped beside him and gently held his hand. Then Bradley slowly walked toward me, before lowering his head in apology. He admitted he had been weak, selfish, and blinded by fear of losing status and approval. At that moment, Bradley and Whitney chose to leave the luxurious celebration behind and stand beside me instead. They turned their backs on empty prestige and chose kindness over arrogance. Genevieve smiled warmly at the three of us and announced that her Rolls-Royce was waiting outside to take us to dinner. Together, we walked out of the cloister with our heads held high while the Halverson Beauchamp family remained trapped inside the ruins of their shattered reputation. The elite society they worshipped had already begun abandoning them completely. Justice had finally arrived for those who looked down on human dignity. It should have been the perfect ending. But later that night, during a simple, humble dinner far away from the glittering ballroom, an unexpected moment would heal wounds inside my heart that I believed could never recover. What was the surprise that finally brought peace back to a broken father's soul? The Rolls-Royce finally stopped in front of a small roadside diner glowing beneath dim yellow lights. Inside, the soft clatter of silverware and the comforting smell of simple homemade food slowly washed away the tension of the terrible night behind us. We gathered around an old wooden table near the window. Bradley looked at me with red, swollen eyes filled with shame and regret. Then my son gently took my rough, weathered hands into his own and offered the most sincere apology I had ever heard from him. For the first time in years, I could see that Bradley had truly awakened. The storm of humiliation and heartbreak had forced him to understand something priceless. All the wealth, prestige, and glamorous status in the world could never compare to the love of family and the dignity of a good heart. At that moment, Genevieve's phone rang softly. A bright, cheerful voice burst through the speaker. It was little Caitlin. She had fully regained consciousness and wanted to personally thank Grandpa Hollis for saving her life. Genevieve smiled warmly before showing me a photograph Caitlin had drawn from her hospital bed. The picture was messy and uneven, like most children's drawings, but to me it looked more valuable than any masterpiece in the world. In the drawing, an old man wearing a black suit stood with his arms stretched wide, protecting a little girl from danger. I stared at that picture for a long, quiet moment. No medal, no fortune, no grand award could ever mean more to me than that child's innocent gratitude. Outside the diner window, pale streetlights flickered softly through the rain. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for what felt like the first time in years. Life has a strange way of balancing itself. Character is not built inside luxurious ballrooms or behind expensive designer clothes. True character is revealed in darkness when nobody is watching. It appears in the moment when you must choose between driving past suffering or stopping to help another human being in need. People like Felicity and Carlton spent their lives measuring human worth through money and social status. In the end, all their wealth left them empty and alone. But kindness given from a sincere heart always finds its way back home eventually. Never be ashamed of hard-working hands. Keep being kind even when the world tries to convince you that kindness is weakness. Click the video on the left to hear another unforgettable story filled with heartbreak, justice, and redemption. Tonight, the mud on my hands and the bloodstains on my clothes became proof that my life had truly meant something. Because when all the luxury disappears and every light finally goes dark, character is the only thing you carry with you through the final door. So tell me honestly, would you rather become a humble Hollis with a good heart or a glamorous Felicity with an empty soul? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. My story ends here tonight. Dad's Revenge Real Life thanks you for listening and staying with me until the very end. May you always protect the goodness inside your heart, no matter how cruel the world becomes. The air turned thick, heavy with the smell of money, when Oriana placed a sheet of paper on the table. It was a draft budget for the wedding, something I had never seen in my entire 69 years. A number at the bottom of the page made me narrow my eyes. $900,000. She did not even blink as she slid it toward me. Meanwhile, I sat there confused, unable to grasp what kind of problem had just appeared in front of me. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. This is a very strange story. The groom's family demanding wedding money from the bride's side. Subscribe and leave a comment with the number 8 so we can begin this story together. I was sitting at Coastal Pearl, a restaurant where the sound of waves outside the balcony rolled in softly like the heartbeat of a storm slowly approaching. Across from me sat Oriana Whitfield, the future mother-in-law of my daughter. She looked like she had stepped straight out of a luxury magazine. Her hair was tied in a flawless high bun without a single strand out of place. The diamond ring on her finger was so large, I felt like it could anchor a small boat. But her eyes were different. Cold. Calculating. They were not the eyes of a woman about to become family. They were the eyes of a hunter measuring the weight of its prey. I took a sip of white wine. The sharp bitterness settled on my tongue. Oriana kept talking endlessly about her family lineage in Greenwich, about gala evenings at Yale, about traditional values that people like me, in her words, would never truly understand. My daughter Emma sat beside me. She held tightly to the hand of her fiancé Kane. Kane looked uneasy. He avoided looking at his mother. Instead, he stared down at his plate, as if searching for a way out. I looked at Emma. My daughter had always been a simple child. She never needed any of this. But Oriana did. She needed a stage where she could display her borrowed glamour. You see, in my line of business, you learn to read people by the way they treat the waiters. Oriana snapped at a young server simply because the wine was not cold enough. She used luxury like a weapon to crush the people around her. She glanced at my suit with quiet disdain. Emma lightly touched my leg under the table. At that moment, my phone vibrated once inside my pocket, a short reminder of a message. I looked at my daughter and noticed something different in her eyes. I knew Emma wanted a simple wedding dream with the man she loved. She had always been that kind of person. But the moment that draft appeared on the table, I knew it was a financial black hole waiting to swallow them whole. I smiled. The calm smile of a father who had lived through enough storms to recognize when another one was about to arrive. I looked straight into Oriana's deep blue eyes. Behind the expensive foundation on her face, I saw something chillingly empty. This story is not just about an extravagant wedding. It is about a battle for survival between sincerity and bottomless greed. Everything was only beginning, and I promise you the ending will make it impossible for you to look away from the screen. Oriana took a sip of sparkling water with a kind of aristocratic elegance that felt almost theatrical. She pushed the budget paper toward me. Her fingers carried the heavy scent of perfume and a pride she did not even try to hide. The number $900,000 was still sitting there. Was it a plan for a joyful day or a crushing financial burden for a young couple just starting their lives? The Whitfield family has its own standards, Silas, she began in a low but commanding voice. We come from Greenwich. We studied at Yale. We do not host cheap outdoor parties with barbecue and beer. This wedding represents the face of our family. I stayed silent. I let her talk. In business, the person who talks the most is usually the one who knows the least or the one trying to hide something. I watched Kane. The young man kept his head lowered. He would not look me in the eyes the way he had before. Something was not right. A groom should look happy, not like someone who is afraid of something. Oriana continued digging into the differences in social class. She talked about elite friends who would fly in from London and Paris. She talked about Kane marrying into a lower class. Unbelievable. She used that phrase so casually as if my daughter were some discounted item her son was generously choosing to take home. So according to Whitfield tradition, the bride's family will cover most of the expenses. In other words, if my daughter wanted to match her son, she needed to make up the difference. Oriana tapped her finger lightly on the number $630,000. That was 70% of the total budget. She looked at me as if she were granting a privilege. I know you have a small construction company. I hope you have saved enough for Emma's big day. Do not let the girl embarrass herself in front of our friends. It was the tone of someone hollow inside. Truly wealthy and truly refined people at least understand the most basic manners. To me it felt like an insult. At home my daughter was treated like a treasure. Here she was being spoken of like a discounted product. I saw Emma gripping the edge of the tablecloth so tightly that her fingertips turned pale. That only fueled my anger even more. But it was still too early for me to understand the full picture. I looked again at the ring on Oriana's finger. It glittered under the restaurant lights, but to someone who had worked with all kinds of materials, something about it felt wrong. It was too perfect, too flashy, just like the woman wearing it. A display meant to hide something rotten underneath. She thought I was just a poor father worried about paying the bill. She thought she could scare a man who built his entire career from nothing by flashing the name Greenwich. Kane tried to raise his head, as if he wanted to say something, but one sharp glare from Oriana shut him down immediately. I felt a wave of sadness for him. A man who was supposed to become the pillar of his own family, yet he could not even stand up for himself in this moment. Maybe it all came from the manipulation of his mother. If my guess was right, she was using her own son like a puppet on a stage. She was turning this wedding into a business deal. I took a sip of cold water. The chill ran down my spine. I was about to speak when I felt another vibration from my pocket. Not a single short buzz like before. This time it came 3 times in a row. Another signal from Emma. My daughter looked at me with eyes that were trying to tell me something. Because the previous signal I had not even checked yet, I had been too busy listening to Oriana's endless monologue. I lowered my head and pulled out my phone. A series of messages appeared, all carrying the same words. I read the line over and over again. Dad, he is not the groom. She is the groom. I looked up. Oriana was still talking endlessly about a rare type of orchid that needed to be imported from the Netherlands. She looked flawless. But my daughter's words began echoing in my mind like an alarm bell. She is the groom. What did that mean? Kane was just a pawn. A tool she was using to enter my family. Her real target was not the wedding. It was my wallet. I took a slow, deep breath. The calm of a seasoned businessman returned to me. I glanced at Kane. The young man still kept his head down, his hands tightly clasped together. Now I understood his uneasiness. It was not anxiety about the wedding. It was the guilt of someone participating in a deception against the person he loved. Oriana seemed to notice my unusual silence. She tilted her head, a gesture of artificial concern. Mr. Silas, you seem deep in thought. I understand that $630,000 is not a small number for a construction man. But think about Emma's future. The girl deserves the very best. I smiled. It was the same smile I used during the most intense negotiations. Thank you for sharing the Whitfield family traditions, I said, my voice calm and steady. It has been very enlightening. She did not just want money for a wedding. She wanted control. She wanted to drain the people she considered beneath her. I realized Emma's foot was still touching mine under the table. I placed my hand over hers on the table. I wanted my daughter to know I had received the message, and I would not let anyone hurt her. Oriana raised an eyebrow. So we are agreed then. I need a deposit of $200,000 for the event planner tomorrow morning. They do not hold reservations long for strangers. She was rushing. A classic sign of a con artist when they sense their prey starting to hesitate. They push you into urgency so you do not have time to think. They want you to sign the check before you notice the cracks in their perfect mask. Let me think about it, I replied. I need to review the cash flow from my current projects. $1 million wedding deserves careful preparation, does it not? Oriana's eyes flashed with a hint of irritation. She was not used to being delayed, but she quickly recovered her polite expression. Of course. I will wait for your call tonight. Do not disappoint us. We stood up. Lunch ended with an awkward silence hanging in the air. When we stepped outside the restaurant, the sea breeze felt cold against my skin. I watched Oriana and Kane walk toward the luxury car waiting for them. I knew the battle had only just begun. Emma grabbed my arm as we walked toward the parking lot. Dad, I am sorry, she whispered. I pulled my daughter into a tight embrace. There is nothing to apologize for, Princess. I have seen everything I needed to see. Now I had a new mission. I needed to find out who Oriana Whitfield really was, and why Kane said she was the groom. The answer lay somewhere that her money could not hide. I took out my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. Why would a mother be willing to use her own son as bait? And what terrible secret was Kane hiding about his family? The discoveries made by Detective Joe Russo would make you shiver at the cruelty of this woman. Oriana's car disappeared behind the line of trees. I stood there tasting the salt of the sea and the bitterness of betrayal. Emma slid into the passenger seat of my car. She was not crying. She simply stared straight ahead into the empty distance. A heavy silence filled the air. I did not start the engine right away. I needed to hear the truth. Dad, Kane tried to warn me, Emma finally said. Her voice was thin like a fragile thread. He loves me, but he is her slave. A slave of flesh and blood. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The skin on my hands turned pale. Tell me about that message, I said firmly. Emma turned toward me. Her eyes were red. Kane said the Whitfield family is a lie. They have no trust fund. They have no mansion in Greenwich. Everything she wears, the car she drives, all of it is rented with the last dollars taken from her previous victims. She is not looking for a daughter-in-law. She is looking for a sponsor for her decaying luxury lifestyle. Kane has been manipulated since he was a child. She holds secrets about him. She threatens to destroy his life if he does not help her carry out this scheme. He calls her the groom because she is the one who decides every move. Kane is only a shadow. A shock ran down my spine. This was not a wedding. This was an armed robbery, except the weapons were marriage papers and empty promises. Oriana was a con artist. She used the emotions of young people to drain the parents who loved them. My anger slowly gave way to clarity. I remembered Kane's eyes in the restaurant. That silent plea now made sense. He wanted to escape, but Oriana's cage was too strong. He truly loved Emma. And because of that love, he risked everything to send her a warning under the table. I started the engine. The motor roared to life with determination. We will not let her win, I said. But we need proof. We need to know how many families this monster has passed through before reaching us. Emma looked at me, worry clear on her face. What are we going to do, Dad? They are professionals. They have good lawyers. They have perfect fake documents. I gently tapped my daughter's hand. They may have professionalism, but I have the truth. And I have old friends who never forget a debt. I drove toward the center of the city. In my mind, a plan was already forming. A plan not only to protect Emma, but also to bring justice for the people she had drained before us. Oriana thought she had found a wealthy and gullible builder. She did not know that builders are the people who know exactly how to tear down rotten structures from the foundation. I stopped the car in front of an old building. This was where Joe Russo worked, a former detective with a mind like a computer. If anyone could rip the mask off Oriana Whitfield, it would be him. Before stepping inside, I looked at Emma one last time. I promise you this wedding will still happen, but not the way she wants it to. It will be a wedding of freedom. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of Joe Russo's office. The familiar smell of old tobacco and worn leather hit my nose. Joe sat behind a desk buried under piles of files. He did not look up. He simply tapped a pencil against the desk in a steady rhythm. I had known Joe for 20 years back, when he was a detective with a reputation as a bloodhound who never gave up. Silas, Joe said, his voice rough like sand in his throat. You never come to see me unless someone is about to face serious trouble. I sat down across from him and placed Oriana's budget sheet on the desk. I need you to look into this woman, Oriana Whitfield. Joe picked up the paper, glanced at the number $900,000, and smirked. An expensive price for a wedding, but a cheap price to buy your freedom if you find out early enough. He turned to an old computer and began typing rapidly. The room fell silent, except for the steady spin of the ceiling fan and the pounding of my heart in my chest. I watched Joe's face closely. The wrinkles on his forehead tightened. His eyes narrowed behind thick glasses. A few minutes passed before a dry beep sounded. Joe rotated the screen toward me. Take a look, Silas. Whitfield is not her real name. An old identification photo appeared on the screen. The same face, but younger and sharper. Oriana Marie Lorella. That was her real name. Joe began reading through the information. She is not from Greenwich. She was born into a poor family on the outskirts of Ohio. No Yale. No aristocratic tradition. Just a long list of civil lawsuits and restraining orders. She is a performer, Joe said. Her specialty is marriage fraud. She targets wealthy fathers, men who love their daughters so much that they become blind. She uses her son as bait to gain access. Once the wedding deposits are transferred into shell accounts, she and the boy disappear without a trace. I felt my blood begin to boil. The humiliation at Coastal Pearl suddenly had its answer. She dared to use Emma's love as part of a filthy scam. She dared to mock my work, while she herself did not have a single honest dollar to her name. But there is something strange here, Joe suddenly said. He pointed at a red line on the screen. In the two most recent cases, her son Cain tried to contact the police. But she always escaped because of strict confidentiality agreements. She holds something over Cain. Something powerful enough to keep him obedient even while he hates her for it. Now I understood the desperation in Cain's eyes. He was not an accomplice. He was another prisoner trapped inside his mother's scheme. Joe pulled out a yellow folder from the bottom drawer. This is the case from Charlotte 3 years ago. A construction contractor family lost $2 million. The father collapsed and died of a stroke shortly after the scam was revealed. Oriana does not just steal money. She takes lives and destroys reputations. My hand tightened into a fist. I was not the contractor from Charlotte. I was Silas. And I was not going to let this story end the way she wanted. Joe looked at me, a sharp light flashing in his eyes. So, what is your plan? I stared at Oriana's photograph on the screen. A plan was forming. One that required the same level of ruthlessness she had shown my family. We will let her believe she is winning, I said quietly. We will let her reach for that $1 million. But that moment will be the end of Oriana Marie Lorella's career. Joe nodded. A rare smile appeared on his weathered face. I like the way you think, Silas. Let me contact a few old friends at the FBI. We will need more than just these old files. When I stepped out of Joe's office, darkness had already covered the city. Streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I knew Oriana was probably sitting in her rented luxury apartment, sipping wine and dreaming about my money. What she did not know was that Detective Joe Russo had just opened a Pandora's box she would never want to see. But there was one detail Joe had discovered in those files that made me stop beside my car. There was a victim whose name never appeared in the official records. Someone who vanished after confronting Oriana. Who was that person? And why did Cain look terrified whenever he mentioned that name to Emma? The truth behind Oriana's crimes was deeper than we had imagined. Joe Russo flipped another page in the file. The soft rustle of paper in the quiet office sounded like fingernails scraping across wood. He slid another photograph toward me. This time it was not an identification photo. It was a candid shot taken inside a courthouse in Atlanta. Oriana stood there smiling, a victorious smile beside an older man who looked completely shattered. Look closely, Silas, Joe said. This is her script. Charlotte, Atlanta, Naples. Every city is a different name. Every family is left in ruins. She never uses a gun. She uses marriage licenses. She convinces the victims to sign the checks willingly because they want to save face. They would rather lose the money than let the world know they were fools who got played. I stared at the list of victims: construction families, self-made business owners. All of them looked like me, people who worked hard and loved their daughters too much. Oriana was not just a thief. She was a parasite. She drained financial resources and left behind emotional corpses. A chill crawled down my spine when I reached the notes about the case in Naples. One father took his own life after discovering the entire payroll fund of his company had been drained under the pretense of a wedding deposit in Italy. Oriana disappeared immediately afterward with $800,000 in cash. Not a trace. Not a goodbye. The cruelty went far beyond anything I had imagined. To her, destroying a human life was nothing more than another number on a balance sheet. I thought about Emma. If we had not realized the truth in time, my daughter would have been the next victim. She would have carried the pain of betrayal from the man she planned to marry. But what about Cain? I asked, my eyes still fixed on the file. Why does he stay with her? Joe sighed, as a thin ribbon of smoke drifted into the air. That is the darkest part. Oriana is not just his mother. She is the keeper of his secret. There was an accident 10 years ago. A hit and run. Oriana stepped forward and took the blame for Cain, but in reality she used it to put a permanent noose around his neck. Every time Cain tries to leave, she threatens to reopen the case. She turned a mother's protection into a lifelong slave contract. That is why Cain sent that message. He is trying to save Emma. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. Neon lights flickered like watchful eyes in the darkness. I did not just feel anger. I felt a cold determination forming inside me. Oriana Whitfield, or Oriana Marie Lorella. This time she had chosen the wrong man to target. She thought I was an aging contractor who could be fooled by fancy words and high society names. She did not know that I had built the strongest foundations out of rubble. And I also knew how to bring down a rotten structure from the inside. Joe, I said, without turning around, I need a list of every surviving victim. We are not fighting this alone. We are bringing all her ghosts back at once. Joe nodded and reached for the phone. I knew the game had changed. Oriana was probably already planning the next dinner where she would demand the money transfer. She had no idea that dinner would be the last one she enjoyed in freedom. But just as I was about to leave, Joe called out, "Silas, there is one more thing. I just found the name of the victim who disappeared in Naples. You are not going to believe it. That person had a connection to Cain closer than anyone else. A truth that could completely change the way we see that young man. Was Cain truly an accomplice? Or was he the final card that could turn the entire game around?" I arranged to meet Cain in an empty parking lot near the harbor. The sea wind blew hard. The sound of metal chains striking the masts echoed like the shackles of a ghost ship. Cain stepped out from the shadows. He wore a black coat, the collar pulled high to hide his pale face. When he saw me, he froze. His eyes held fear mixed with a strange sense of relief. "I knew you would call, Cain," said his voice trembling. "Did you read Emma's message?" I walked closer and looked straight into his eyes. The eyes of someone trapped with no escape. "I read it," I replied. "And I also read the file about your mother. Or should I say Oriana Lorella?" Cain stepped back and leaned against the hood of a car. His whole body seemed to collapse like a house without a foundation. "I am sorry, Silas. I truly love Emma. But she is a devil. She never lets me escape. She uses that accident from years ago to force me to perform this act with her again and again." I placed my hand on his shoulder. The steady weight of a builder's hand helped him stand upright again. "Listen to me, Cain. You have two choices. One is to remain her puppet and watch Emma's life get destroyed. The other is to help me end this nightmare. You will not go to prison for the things she forced you to do. I have Joe Russo. I have evidence she does not know exists." I pulled a tiny recording device from my pocket. It was thin enough to hide beneath a shirt collar. "I need you to wear this," I said. "I need you to make her admit the $200,000 deposit. I need her to talk about the families in Charlotte and Naples." Cain stared at the recorder as if it were a ticking bomb. "If she finds it, she will kill me," he whispered. I looked directly into his eyes. "If you do nothing, you will kill yourself slowly every day when you look at Emma. Choose." Cain stayed silent for a long moment. Waves crashed loudly against the rocks. Then he took the device from my hand. His hands were no longer shaking. "I will do it," he said firmly. "I want to be free. I want to deserve Emma. If you have been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it would really help if you hit the like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it is what keeps this entire channel alive. I helped Kane hide the device inside his shirt. I showed him how to press the hidden activation button. We only have one chance, I warned him. Tomorrow night at the family dinner, when she asks me to sign the check, that is when you act. Use her own arrogance to lead her into the trap. Kane nodded. Then he turned and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there alone, feeling the restless pulse of the plan beginning to move. This was a gamble. If Kane betrayed me, I would lose everything. But I chose to believe the 6 words Emma had sent. I chose to believe that love could be stronger than the manipulation of a con artist. I returned to my car. My phone lit up with a message from Oriana. An address for a luxury restaurant tomorrow night. A sweet note about the bright future of our 2 families. She was still dreaming about the $1 million. She did not know the noose was slowly tightening around her own neck. But just as I was about to drive away, another black car slowly rolled out from the dark corner of the parking lot. It had been there the whole time. Had someone been watching our meeting? And if Oriana already knew about our plan, would Kane even survive long enough to walk into that dinner tomorrow night? The luxury restaurant was strangely quiet. Candlelight flickered across the polished silverware on the table. Oriana sat there in a deep red velvet dress. She looked like a queen waiting to receive tribute. Kane sat beside her. He wore the shirt where I had hidden the recorder. His face was stiff. I saw a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. "Silas, you look tired," Oriana said sweetly. She raised her glass of wine. "Perhaps preparing $1,050,000 has been exhausting for you. Do not worry. Once we become family, it will all be worth it." I looked straight into her eyes. I took out my checkbook and placed it on the table. "I prepared the first $200,000 as you requested. But I do have a few questions about the wedding insurance fund you mentioned. Why is the beneficiary account registered to a company in Naples?" Oriana froze for a fraction of a second. Then she laughed. A professional laugh. "Oh, that is simply a legal structure for tax purposes. In Greenwich we always optimize our financial flows. You would not want your money wasted on the government, would you?" She pulled out a stack of invoices. All of them were fake bills from non-existent vendors. She enthusiastically described enormous costs for flowers, musicians, and private security teams. She had no idea that every word she spoke was being transmitted directly to Joe Russo and the investigators sitting inside a van in the parking lot. Suddenly, Kane spoke. His voice trembled slightly, but it was clear. "Mom, do we really need that much cash? Emma's father has already been generous. Why not transfer the money directly to the contractors?" Oriana's eyes instantly turned cold. She looked at her son, as if he were a traitor. "Darling, you should focus on being a good groom. Leave financial matters to the adults." Then she turned back to me, trying to recover her calm expression. "You see, young people sometimes fail to understand the value of discretion." I slid the check toward her. I had signed it, but I had not written the amount yet. "I would like to hear again about Charlotte. You said your family has strong connections there. Will any of those friends attend the wedding?" The name Charlotte made Oriana stiffen. The wine glass in her hand trembled, red liquid spilling over the rim. "Why would you mention that place?" she asked, her voice dropping into a threat. I smiled. The smile of a builder who had just discovered the fatal crack in a wall. "Because I recently met an old friend of yours from there. He said you owe him an apology. And about $2 million. The atmosphere in the room collapsed instantly. Oriana's aristocratic mask vanished. She leaned forward, her eyes blazing like a trapped animal. "Who do you think you are? You are nothing but a lowly builder. You have no right to question me." She snatched the check from the table. But at that exact moment, Kane stood up. He reached inside his collar and ripped the recording device free, dropping it directly onto Oriana's plate. "It is over," Mom, Kane said. His voice now carried relief and strength. "The FBI has heard everything." Oriana's face turned from red to ghostly pale. She stared at the tiny device, blinking with a red light. Then she looked around the room. The waiters who had been standing quietly suddenly moved closer. They were not waiters. They were undercover agents. Oriana jumped to her feet and rushed toward the back exit. But she stopped abruptly when someone stepped in from the bright doorway. It was not a police officer. It was a middle-aged man with a long scar across his forehead. The missing victim from Naples that Joe Russo had mentioned. The moment Oriana saw him, she let out a horrified cry, as if she had seen a ghost. They believed gray hair meant we had forgotten how to fight. But the truth did not end with an arrest. Another explosive secret about the real connection between this man, Oriana, and Cain was about to be revealed right there in the middle of the room. The man who stepped out of the shadows was Arthur. The victim everyone thought had disappeared in Naples. Oriana stepped backward. The color drained from her face. The expensive foundation on her skin could not hide the terror twisting through every muscle. She stumbled over a chair and collapsed onto the floor. Agents closed in. The metallic sound of handcuffs snapped through the room. Click. "It is over, Oriana," I said. My voice was cold as steel. "Did you really think you could bury everything under silk and luxury?" Oriana showed no remorse. She glared at Cain with burning hatred. "Traitor! I gave birth to you. I pulled you out of the mud." She screamed as the agents dragged her past the elegant dining tables. But Cain did not look back. He stood beside Emma. Their hands were tightly intertwined. For the first time in years, I saw his shoulders relax. The weight of slavery had finally been lifted. The trial lasted 11 months. It was a journey through darkness. Joe Russo worked without rest. He brought a long line of victims into the courtroom. Fathers with white hair. Families ruined by bankruptcy. Mothers who had lost their children to the cruelty of this woman. Oriana sat there in an orange prison uniform. No diamond anchor ring. No elegant speeches about Yale or Greenwich. She still tried to perform. She blamed circumstances. She blamed Cain. She claimed she was only a victim of a money-obsessed society. But numbers do not lie. The recordings from Cain's microphone exposed everything. Every fake invoice. Every plan to drain money from another family. Everything stood in the open like daylight. The final verdict left the courtroom silent. Oriana received 15 years in prison with no parole. Roger, the accomplice behind the shell accounts, received 12 years. When the judge struck the gavel, I saw a single tear slide down Cain's cheek. It was not pity, it was the relief of a soul finally escaping hell. It seemed like everything had finally ended. Justice had been served. The criminals had paid the price. But when we stepped outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and former victims embracing each other in tears, Arthur approached me. He handed me an old piece of paper that had been found in Oriana's archive. He looked at Cain, then back at me with a complicated expression. "Silas, you should read this," Arthur whispered. "This is why she kept Cain under control all these years. It is not only about the accident from years ago." I unfolded the paper. Crooked handwriting from more than 20 years ago appeared on the page. My breath caught in my throat. It was a secret about blood, a truth Cain himself had never known. A revelation that could completely redefine the meaning of family we had fought so hard to protect. Sometimes the greatest victory is not putting a criminal behind bars. Sometimes it is facing the truth about the people we love most. But would Emma and Cain still be able to move forward once this terrible truth came to light? I stood beneath the old oak tree in my yard. The evening breeze moved gently through the leaves. There were no elegant wine glasses clinking together. No unfamiliar guests from Paris or London. Only the laughter of a few close friends, and the smell of freshly cut grass. Emma stepped out wearing a simple white dress. It did not cost thousands of dollars, yet it shined brighter than anything Oriana had ever worn. The paper Arthur gave me still rested quietly in my jacket pocket. The secret about Cain being the real son of one of Oriana's first victims had finally been revealed. She had not only stolen his future, she had stolen his identity when he was still a child and raised him as a tool for her scams. I looked at Cain. He stood waiting for Emma beside the wooden arch I had built with my own hands. He knew the truth now, and he had chosen to face it. Their wedding happened quickly. The entire ceremony cost $520 for the paperwork and a few bundles of wildflowers. When the pastor pronounced them, husband and wife, Cain turned toward me. His eyes were wet. "Thank you, Dad," he said softly. He no longer called me Mr. Silas. He called me Pop. One simple word, but it carried the weight of 1,000. It was recognition. It was the beginning of a real family. I looked toward the horizon. The dark clouds from the trial had finally passed. Oriana sat behind prison bars. She still showed no remorse. In the letters she sent from prison, she continued blaming her son. She called it betrayal. I called it awakening. A con artist will never understand that love cannot be measured by the numbers written on a wedding budget. When the celebration began, I sat alone in an old armchair. I reflected on everything that had happened. We are often blinded by glamour. We fear being seen as lower class. That fear is the fertile ground where people like Oriana plant their seeds. But I learned something valuable. When someone reveals their true character at the dinner table, believe them the first time. Do not paint over their cruelty with excuses. I lifted a glass of lemonade. The sour and sweet were perfectly balanced. Emma and Cain danced together on the grass. They did not have $1 million in their account, but they had each other. They had the truth. And they had a father willing to fight to the very end to protect that truth. I looked toward the imaginary camera in front of me. There was something I wanted to tell you. Life does not always deliver dramatic reversals like the movies. But if you keep your feet firmly on the ground, you will never be swept away by artificial tides. If you followed the story all the way to this moment, you probably felt something for it. So please take one small second to help us. Subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it means everything to us. The story of the fake Whitfield family has come to an end, but the lessons about trust and awareness will remain. My name is Silas, and this is how I reclaimed my daughter's life. But have you ever wondered how many other Orianas might still be sitting across from you at a Sunday lunch table? The next secret I will reveal about another family of scammers is even more chilling. Are you ready for the next plan? Wait for the story next week. My wife had just been laid to rest, and the dirt on her grave hadn't even dried yet when my daughter-in-law walked up through the pouring rain and told me to pack my bags for a cheap nursing home. She called me a senile old man and a freeloader, not realizing she had just awakened a monster that had been sleeping for 20 years. Welcome back to Dad's Real-Life Revenge. Grab a glass of water, some snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. The sharp click of Savannah's high heels echoed across the wet stone pathways of the cemetery. The overpowering scent of her expensive yet somehow cheap-smelling perfume completely drowned out the smell of damp earth and funeral flowers surrounding us. She stood there beneath a black umbrella that concealed half of her heavily made-up face. Not a single word of condolence. Not a single bow before Ivan's grave. She looked at me with the cold stare of someone examining an old piece of furniture that needed to be thrown away. Savannah tossed a thin folder down in front of me. Raindrops from Atlanta splattered across the plastic cover, smearing the surface. Then she spoke in a shrill, commanding voice. Listen carefully, Dad. The house may be in Terrence's name, but it's our money. Mom is gone now, and you can't manage the place by yourself. I've already reserved a spot for you at Green Valley Nursing Home. The van will come pick you up tomorrow. Just sign this. I stood motionless in the rain. My old worn-out coat was soaked through heavy on my shoulders. I trembled, letting my shoulders sag and my knees appear weak and unsteady. I looked at Savannah with the vacant, confused eyes of an elderly black man who had lost his grip on reality. Savannah, I whispered, Ivan was just buried. Let me stay here and pay my respects to her. I don't want to go anywhere. This is your mother's and my home. Savannah let out a mocking laugh. The twisted smile on her face revealed the full depth of her greed. Stop acting senile, Dad. You're just getting in our way. Sign it, and I'll have Terrence pack your things. Don't make me use stronger measures. She yanked a pen from her purse and shoved it into my trembling hand. Inside, my blood began to boil. The helpless old man she saw was nothing more than a perfect disguise. Deep within me, the razor-sharp mind of a financial bloodhound officially awakened. The ultimate predator had returned. Savannah, you have no idea who you've just provoked. You think I'm a useless old man. Enjoy this brief moment of victory while you can. I will make you pay for every single cent. I took the pen, still pretending that my hand was shaking, and scribbled an unsteady signature across the authorization form. Savannah snatched the papers away and turned to leave. The sound of her heels gradually disappeared into the curtain of rain. I watched her walk away and slowly clenched my fist. The game had officially begun. The night settled over the cemetery. The cold Atlanta rain continued pouring down without mercy. I stood alone beside Ivan's freshly covered grave. Bending down, I placed the final white rose on the waterlogged earth. The promise I had made to her remained unchanged. I would protect Terrence. I would protect this family's legacy. A tall figure emerged from the darkness beyond the trees. It was Victor, my longtime neighbor and the only loyal friend I had left. He said nothing. Quietly, he held an umbrella over me and placed a steady hand on my shoulder, which was trembling from the cold. "Come on, Warren," Victor whispered. "My truck is parked over there. It's time to lay all the cards on the table." The old vehicle sped through the darkness toward the outskirts of the city. Our destination was an abandoned warehouse, hidden behind a cluster of ancient trees. The place was damp year-round, filled with the smell of rotting wood and rusted metal. Nobody paid attention to it, especially not Savannah. In her eyes, it was nothing more than a worthless pile of junk. She was wrong. Victor pushed open the rusted steel door. The hinges groaned loudly in protest. He flipped a switch. Flickering fluorescent lights sputtered to life, revealing a secret room concealed behind a wooden wall. I stepped inside. My chest tightened. This was Ivan's war room. Every wall was covered with charts, surveillance photographs, and financial records marked with red ink. Yvonne had been quietly investigating Savannah for 2 years. She knew her daughter-in-law was having an affair. She knew Savannah had been draining assets from our son behind his back. At the center of the room sat an old black reel-to-reel recorder. I walked over and pressed play. Static crackled through the speaker. Then Yvonne's voice emerged, weak yet unwavering. "Warren, if you're listening to this tape, it means I'm no longer with you. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. But Savannah and the people around her are dangerous. They're targeting Terrence. They want to take everything from him. Open the hidden drawer beneath the desk. Your weapon is inside. Please reclaim justice for me." The recording ended with a sharp click. A heavy silence filled the room. I dropped to my knees on the damp warehouse floor, tears mixed with the rainwater still clinging to my face. The grief inside me transformed into a towering fire of rage. Slowly I stood and opened the hidden drawer exactly as Yvonne had instructed. Inside sat a black velvet box. I opened it. A flash of cold silver reflected through the darkness. Inside was an exquisitely engraved luxury fountain pen and an encrypted memory card. I picked up the pen and wrapped my hand around it. Its weight steadied me. Its weight reminded me exactly who I was. I turned toward Victor. The confusion and weakness of a senile old man had vanished from my eyes. What looked back at him now was the gaze of a hunting wolf that had finally found its prey. I knew exactly what had to be done. Those greedy parasites were going to pay. But the most terrifying discovery was not the pen. It was the first audio file stored on the memory card. The voice recording did not contain only Savannah. There was another man. A man whose voice made my blood run cold. Because the secret he revealed was powerful enough to destroy my son's entire life in a single moment. A deep, gravelly voice echoed from the audio file stored on the memory card, sending a chill down my spine. It belonged to Preston Sinclair, one of the most notorious tycoons in the city. He and Savannah were plotting to swallow the life's work of my son. Their plan was simple and ruthless. They would frame Terrence, push him toward criminal charges, and seize everything he had built. I stopped the recording. The sharp click echoed through the dark warehouse. I stared at the silver pen resting in my hand. Memories from 20 years ago came flooding back like a tidal wave. There was a time when Atlanta's financial world trembled at a single name: Warren Vance, forensic auditor. The IRS's ultimate bloodhound. I had once been a true predator. Whenever I smelled dirty money, someone eventually went to prison. I brought down dozens of tax-evading corporations and dismantled international money laundering networks that stretched across multiple countries. Then I walked away from all of it. When Yvonne gave birth to Terrence, I made a promise. I would put down my sword. I wanted to be an ordinary father. I wanted my son to grow up in peace instead of being surrounded by enemies and revenge. For 20 years I buried my identity. I willingly wore worn-out clothes. I played the role of a slow, forgetful old black man whose only concern was taking care of his family. But my patience had only fed the greed of monsters. They saw me as easy prey. They thought they could trample on Yvonne's legacy and destroy Terrence's future. They were terribly mistaken. A bloodhound never loses its instincts. It merely sleeps. And now Savannah herself had awakened it. I removed the rain-soaked coat I had worn from the cemetery. Then I straightened my back. My body no longer trembled. My eyes had become as cold and sharp as steel. I turned toward Victor and spoke with the firm authority of a man accustomed to command. "Victor, I need a list. Every subsidiary Preston Sinclair owns. Every bank account Savannah controls. I don't want a single dollar overlooked. Victor stared at me. Respect flashed across his face. He nodded immediately. Yes, sir. I've been waiting 15 years for this day. The bloodhound has returned. I walked out of the abandoned warehouse. The rain was still falling, but my mind had never been clearer. I would return to that house. I would show Savannah what a real performance looked like. I would let her celebrate her victory. I would let her grow comfortable inside her own stupidity. And then I would push her straight into the abyss she had dug for herself. I pulled out my phone and called Terrence. My plan was to pretend I was devastated and heartbroken to tell him Savannah had thrown me out. But the moment the call connected, something unexpected happened. Instead of hearing my son's voice, an unfamiliar voice answered, cold, threatening, and completely devoid of mercy. Mr. Vance, the stranger said quietly, if I were you, I would stop asking questions about Preston Sinclair. My grip tightened around the phone. The voice continued, your wife died because she got too close to the truth. A wave of icy rage swept through me. For a moment I could hear nothing except my own heartbeat. Then the stranger delivered one final sentence, the sentence that changed everything. And if Terrence learns what his real role is in this operation, he won't live long enough to regret it. The line went dead. I stood frozen beneath the rain, because for the first time that night I realized this was no longer about greed. This was war. The voice on the other end of the line let out a cold, mocking laugh. It ordered me to return home immediately. Terrence was in serious trouble. I ended the call. My heart was pounding, but my mind remained perfectly calm. The dirty game had started sooner than I expected. I headed straight back to my house. The moment I stepped through the front door, chaos greeted me. My small office had been completely ransacked. Books, documents, and old files had been torn apart and scattered across the floor. Savannah stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. In her hands was one of Terrence's golf clubs. Her eyes looked wild, animalistic. The instant she saw me, she charged forward. You damned old man, she screamed. Where did you hide Terrence's intellectual property files? Give them to me right now. Immediately I let my shoulders slump. I shrank into the corner. I clutched my head and pretended to be terrified. I don't know, I muttered through fake sobs. I don't know anything. Yvonne, please help me. Savannah has gone crazy. Then everything happened at once. The sound of Terrence's car pulled into the driveway. Savannah heard it too. A vicious spark flashed through her eyes. Without hesitation, she clawed at her own neck. She ripped open part of her blouse, sending buttons flying. Then she deliberately slammed herself into the edge of a dressing table. A bruise instantly began forming on her forehead. She collapsed to the floor just as Terrence rushed through the front door. Terrence ran to her side. Savannah pointed directly at me while sobbing uncontrollably. Honey, your father has lost his mind. I was only trying to help clean his room and he attacked me. He even threatened to kill me. Look what he did. Terrence turned toward me. The look in my son's eyes was a mixture of disappointment, pain, and helplessness. Dad, he shouted. How could you do this? I offered no defense. Instead, I stared back with the vacant expression of a confused old man. Savannah sniffled dramatically before pulling a document from her purse. It was a power of attorney agreement, giving her control over Terrence's assets and business interests. She spoke softly, guiding him exactly where she wanted him to go. Do you see now? Your father isn't mentally competent anymore. You need to sign this and let me manage the company. Otherwise, he'll destroy everything. Terrence was completely under her influence. He picked up a pen. He was seconds away from signing. I knew I had to act. Staggering forward, I snatched the papers from his hands. I laughed foolishly. Let me sign. I love signing things. Savannah smiled to herself. Certain she had won, she eagerly handed me the pen she had prepared, but she had no idea what had just happened. Moments earlier, I had switched her pen with the thermal ink fountain pen from Yvonne's secret warehouse. I signed my name. Then I encouraged Terrence to sign beside mine. Savannah immediately grabbed the paperwork. She stared at the signatures with complete satisfaction. Victory radiated from her face. She believed she finally had everything she wanted. What she didn't know was that the special ink would disappear completely within 24 hours. No trace, no signature, no evidence. Her performance had been flawless. But my trap was even better. Within an hour, Savannah had packed her things and convinced Terrence to leave with her. According to her, they were meeting Preston Sinclair that very night. Soon the house was silent. I stood alone in the darkness. The foolish smile vanished from my face. I opened my encrypted laptop. A secure tracking program immediately loaded onto the screen. Then my blood ran cold. Terrence's phone had been transmitting normally only minutes earlier. Now the signal was gone. Completely gone. The last recorded location flashed on the screen, an abandoned section of the old harbor. I zoomed in on the map. The signal hadn't simply died. It had been deliberately disabled. My instincts screamed the truth before my mind could fully process it. Terrence was not attending a business meeting. He was walking into an ambush. I grabbed my keys and reached for the phone to call Victor. But before I could dial, another alert suddenly appeared on the screen. A hidden security camera near the harbor had uploaded a fresh image only 30 seconds earlier. The photograph loaded slowly. When it finally became clear, every muscle in my body locked in place. Terrence was on his knees. Two armed men stood behind him, and standing directly in front of my son was Preston Sinclair himself. Smiling. Terrence's tracking signal went dead at the harbor. The instincts of a forensic auditor told me this was a trap. But I couldn't afford to act recklessly. If I wanted to save my son, I needed leverage over the mastermind behind all of this. That man was Preston Sinclair. At midnight, I arrived at Sinclair Corporation's downtown tower. I wasn't driving a luxury car. I wasn't wearing a pinstripe suit. Instead, I wore the blue work uniform of a janitor. I pushed a cleaning cart loaded with disinfectants and mops. In the world of the wealthy, elite, elderly, black janitors like me were completely invisible. They looked straight through me as if I were an empty wall. They freely discussed million-dollar secrets right in front of me because they assumed I was a poor, illiterate, senile old man. That invisibility was my superpower now. I pushed the cart into the service elevator and went directly to the 51st floor. That was where Preston Sinclair's secure executive office was located. The hallway was silent except for the soft sound of my work shoes against the thick carpet. Security cameras covered every angle, but Victor had helped me disrupt the camera loop for exactly 5 minutes. I had 300 seconds. I lightly swiped a universal access card across the electronic lock. The heavy oak door opened without a sound. The billionaire's office was enormous, filled with the scent of premium cigars and expensive wood. Stacks of financial documents were neatly arranged on his desk. I didn't touch them. A professional auditor never leaves evidence of moved objects. I knelt down, pretending to clean beneath his massive solid wood desk. My right hand quickly pulled a miniature military-grade listening device from my pocket. It was no larger than a shirt button. I pressed it firmly into a narrow gap beneath the desk directly below Preston's office telephone. The device activated. A tiny red light flashed once and disappeared. Connection established. Footsteps and laughter echoed from the hallway. Savannah and Preston were returning to the office earlier than expected. I immediately stood up, grabbed my mop, lowered my head, and continued working. The door swung open. Preston and Savannah entered. His arm was wrapped around her waist. A smug grin stretched across his cunning face. They walked right past me without so much as a glance. Savannah tossed her expensive handbag onto the desk and spoke in a flirtatious voice. "Darling, everything is done. That idiot Terrence signed the papers. The senile old man signed too. By tomorrow, the company will be ours." Preston burst into laughter and tightened his arm around her waist. "Excellent. Let's see how that kid handles the mountain of debt I've prepared for him." I quietly pushed my cleaning cart out of the office. The door closed behind me. I entered a restroom on the same floor and put on my secure earpiece. The audio feed from Preston's office came through clearly. But just as I prepared to listen to the next stage of their plan, a phone call interrupted everything. The call changed the entire situation. The voice on the other end wasn't discussing profits or dividing assets. It was the panicked scream of a man in complete terror. He was reporting that every dollar of dirty money hidden in Sinclair Corporation's secret Swiss accounts had just been completely frozen by an unknown force. I smiled in the darkness of the restroom. The mysterious force that had frozen Preston Sinclair's accounts was me. One confidential phone call using an old IRS identification code had triggered an emergency asset freeze order. This financial war was only beginning. The following morning I returned home. I changed out of the janitor's uniform and slipped back into my worn sweater. Then I sat at the kitchen table and slowly prepared a pot of chamomile tea. Savannah walked into the house, looking exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes after a night of panic alongside Preston. As usual, she looked at me with pure contempt. "Old man," she snapped, "why are you still here? Why haven't you moved into the nursing home yet?" I didn't react. Instead, I looked up and gave her a harmless, absent-minded smile. I slid a cup of hot tea toward her. "Savannah," I said in the shaky voice of a confused old man, "have some tea. I saw you up very late last night. You and Preston must be exhausted." The moment Preston's name left my mouth, Savannah froze. Her entire body went rigid. The teacup trembled in her hand, splashing hot tea onto the table. The color drained from her face. Then it returned as a sickly shade of green. "What did you just say?" she stammered. "How do you know who Preston is?" Immediately, I blinked several times and looked around in confusion. I scratched my head and chuckled. "Preston? What Preston? I didn't say Preston. I was talking about you and Terrence. My memory isn't very good these days. Yvonne always said I talk nonsense." Savannah stared at me. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. She searched desperately for a crack in my performance. She found none. For the first time, doubt began to gnaw at her. Was I truly senile, or was I pretending? Silence settled over the room. Only the steady ticking of the clock could be heard. With a single name, I had planted a seed of fear inside her mind. Now she would torture herself with it. Savannah couldn't handle the pressure. She snatched up her purse and hurried toward the door. Moments later, her car sped away from the driveway. She was running to Preston. She needed reassurance. She needed answers. I watched her leave. The harmless smile vanished from my face. My eyes hardened into cold steel. The psychological attack had worked perfectly. The enemy was beginning to unravel from within. I stood up and poured the cold tea down the sink. It was time to abandon the disguise completely. My next stop was Fidelity Bank. The next phase of the takeover plan was waiting. I pulled out my phone to review the latest reports on Preston's frozen assets. Then the screen lit up. An anonymous message had arrived. Attached was a photograph. The image instantly drained every trace of satisfaction from my body. Terrence was tied tightly to a chair. The room around him was dark, windowless, industrial. Whoever had taken the photograph wanted me to see every detail. But that wasn't the worst part. Beside my son stood a large digital countdown clock. Bright red numbers glowed against the darkness. 2 hours. That was all the time remaining. Beneath the photograph was a single message. No greeting, no explanation. Just one sentence. "You can destroy Preston Sinclair's empire, Warren, or you can save your son. You do not have enough time to do both." For the first time since this war began, I felt genuine fear. Not for myself. For Terrence. Then a second notification appeared. A location pin, followed by another message. And the name at the bottom made my blood freeze. Because the sender wasn't Preston Sinclair. It wasn't Savannah. It wasn't anyone I had been hunting. The message was signed by someone who was supposed to have died 20 years ago. Michael Vance. The photograph of Terrence tied to a chair tightened something deep inside my chest. A terrifying wave of rage surged through me. But 20 years as a financial bloodhound had taught me one fundamental truth. The more violence your enemies resort to, the closer they are to collapse. 2 hours was more than enough time to tear apart everything Preston Sinclair had built. I walked out of the house and abandoned the disguise completely. Victor was already waiting beside the car. He handed me a black crocodile leather briefcase and a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit. I put on my armor. Then I fastened a small bronze badge to my lapel, a symbol of authority I had not displayed in 2 decades. The Warren Vance the world feared was finally returning. Our car sped toward Fidelity Bank, the institution holding nearly all of Sinclair Corporation's major loans. I stepped into the grand lobby. The hunched, confused old man was gone. My back was straight. My chin was raised. My eyes were sharp as a drawn blade. The security guards instinctively moved aside as I passed. Without slowing down, I walked directly into the executive office. The bank president looked up, already preparing to throw out an uninvited visitor. Before he could speak, I dropped a thick audit file onto his desk. The man's face instantly lost all color. His hands began to shake. He rose to his feet. Mr. Vance, his voice barely worked. How may I assist you? I sat down calmly. Preston Sinclair owes your institution $8 million due within days. The room became silent. I want to purchase the entire debt. Immediately. The executive swallowed hard. Sir, that type of transaction normally requires several days of review. I leaned forward. The look in my eyes ended the conversation. You have 5 minutes before I begin asking questions about every suspicious transaction connected to Sinclair Corporation. The man practically threw himself at his keyboard. 3 minutes later, emergency transfer documents were sitting in front of me. I opened the black briefcase. Inside rested the silver fountain pen Yvonne had left behind. My weapon, my signature, my promise. I uncapped the pen and signed. One clean stroke. $8 million changed hands. The debt was now mine. Preston Sinclair no longer owed a bank. He owed me. And that meant I possessed the legal leverage to strip away everything he valued. His buildings, his offices, his holdings, his empire. I stood and adjusted my pinstripe jacket. Then I checked my watch. 1 hour and 20 minutes remained. Tonight was the Innovation Gala. Preston and Savannah believed they would be standing beneath bright lights, celebrating victory. They believed the future belonged to them. What they didn't know was that I had already built the financial coffin waiting beneath their feet. I had just stepped outside the bank when Victor came running toward me. His face was twisted with panic. Without saying a word, he thrust a portable radio into my hands. A weak voice crackled through the speaker. It was Terrence. He was crying. Dad. Dad, don't do what they want. Then the transmission dissolved into static. A metallic sound followed. Sharp. Distinct. Terrifying. The unmistakable click of a firearm being loaded. Every muscle in my body tightened. A different voice came onto the channel. The same cold voice that had been manipulating events from the shadows. This time there was no mockery. No games. Only a threat. Warren Vance. The man spoke my full name slowly. You've spent 20 years hiding from who you really are. A second metallic click echoed through the radio. Then came a muffled groan from Terrence. My grip tightened so hard that the plastic casing nearly cracked. The stranger continued. You have exactly 1 hour. His voice remained calm, almost amused. Come to the gala and destroy Preston Sinclair, or come save your son. A pause followed. Then he delivered the sentence that made my blood run cold. Because if you choose the wrong door tonight, only one member of the Vance family will still be alive by sunrise. The transmission ended. Silence. Victor stared at me. The city skyline glittered in the distance. 1 hour remained. One choice. One chance. And for the first time since Yvonne's death, I realized the true enemy might never have been Preston Sinclair at all. The entire ballroom froze. Hundreds of eyes shifted from Preston Sinclair to the black envelope in my hand. Not a single person spoke. The massive LED screen behind the stage glowed softly, waiting. Preston tried to regain control. His voice cracked despite his efforts. What is this nonsense? I smiled. The kind of smile that appears only when the hunt is over and the trap has already snapped shut. You want to know what's inside this envelope, Preston? I slowly turned toward the audience. So do I. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the crowd. Then it died immediately. Because nobody was laughing anymore. I handed the envelope to Victor. Without a word, he removed a memory drive and inserted it into the presentation system. The giant screen flickered. Then the first image appeared. A series of bank transfers, millions of dollars moving through shell corporations, layer after layer, country after country. The audience gasped. Preston's face went white. The second image appeared. Photographs. Savannah and Preston together. Private meetings, luxury resorts, secret apartments, dates and timestamps covering nearly 2 years. Savannah staggered backward. No. The word escaped her lips as a whisper. The third file appeared. Audio recordings. The entire ballroom heard Preston's voice. Clear, undeniable, discussing plans to acquire Terrence's research, discussing fabricated debt, discussing forged contracts, discussing how to remove obstacles, including members of the Vance family. The room erupted. Executives began shouting. Investors stood up from their tables. Several reporters rushed toward the front. Flashes exploded throughout the ballroom. Preston's empire was collapsing in real time. Then I raised my hand. The room gradually fell silent again. That is not why I came here tonight. Every head turned toward me. I pointed at the giant screen. The affair, the theft, the fraud, those are merely symptoms. The real disease is greed. The screen changed again. This time it displayed legal documents, loan transfers, debt assignments, corporate filings, ownership records, one after another, one after another, one after another. Preston stared at them. His breathing became uneven, because he recognized every document, and he understood exactly what they meant. I reached into my jacket and removed a single sheet of paper. Then I looked directly into his eyes. This afternoon I purchased the primary debt secured against Sinclair Corporation. The room exploded with murmurs. Preston's knees nearly buckled. No, his voice sounded weak. Impossible, pathetic, defeated, I continued. As of 6:43 this evening, every major asset pledged against that debt became subject to immediate enforcement. The silence that followed felt endless. Then, I delivered the final blow. Preston Sinclair, you no longer own Sinclair Corporation. The words hit him like a freight train. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. His empire, his buildings, his offices, his prestige, his reputation, everything was gone. The audience watched in stunned disbelief as one of Atlanta's most powerful men realized he had become a spectator to his own destruction. Beside him, Savannah looked equally horrified. She turned toward Preston. Preston turned toward her. The affection between them vanished instantly. Only blame remained. Only fear. Only survival. Then the ballroom doors opened. Federal agents entered in a coordinated line. The lead agent stepped forward holding a folder. Preston Sinclair. Savannah Brooks. You are both being detained pending investigation into fraud, conspiracy, financial crimes, and related offenses. The room erupted once more. Savannah collapsed into a chair. Preston attempted to speak, attempted to negotiate, attempted to threaten. Nobody listened. For the first time in his life, his money could not save him. The agents moved forward. Handcuffs clicked, cold, final, permanent. Yet as I watched them being escorted away, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only one question remained unanswered. Because throughout this entire war, one mystery still lingered. The anonymous messages, the kidnapping, the voice from the shadows, the name that should not have existed. Michael Vance. The man presumed dead for 20 years. As the agents led Preston away, a phone in my pocket vibrated. One new message. One photograph. My heart stopped. The image showed Terrence sitting safely inside an FBI vehicle. Behind him stood a man wearing a dark coat. His face was finally visible. Older, scarred, very much alive. At the bottom of the photograph was a single sentence. The war against Preston was only Chapter 1, Warren. Now it's time for us to discuss what really happened 20 years ago. The giant LED screen illuminated the entire ballroom. Forensic audit reports filled the display. Money laundering trails, tax evasion schemes, hidden shell corporations, debt purchase agreements connected to Sinclair Corporation. The reaction was immediate. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Whispers spread like wildfire. Investors stared in disbelief. Reporters rushed forward. And Preston Sinclair simply stood there, frozen. Then his knees gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the stage. I signaled to the federal agents. Within moments, Savannah and Preston were escorted away from the growing media frenzy and into a storage room behind the stage. The heavy wooden door shut behind us. The noise from the gala faded. Only silence remained. Silence and fear. The room smelled of old paper dust and desperation. I placed 2 black envelopes on the table. Then I looked at them both. This, I said calmly, is your financial death sentence. Checkmate. Savannah lunged forward and tore open the nearest envelope. Her hands shook so violently that she ripped the paper. Inside were official federal warrants, supporting documentation, debt transfer records, proof that I now controlled the obligations that had once kept Sinclair's empire alive. The color drained from her face, her lips trembled. No words came out. Then she collapsed at my feet. Preston's survival instincts activated instantly. He didn't even glance at the woman standing beside him. Instead, he rushed toward me. The powerful billionaire dropped to his knees. "Mr. Vance," his voice cracked. "She manipulated me. Savannah approached me first. She stole Terrence's research. She forced me into this. I'm innocent. Please, you have to believe me." The desperation would have been amusing if it weren't so pathetic. Savannah looked up in shock. Disbelief. Pain. Rage. Only minutes earlier, Preston had been whispering promises into her ear. Now he was throwing her overboard to save himself. Something inside her snapped. She launched herself across the room. "You liar," her nails raked across his face. Blood appeared instantly. "You told me to get rid of Warren. You told me to push Terrence out. You planned everything." Preston staggered backward. Then he struck her. The slap echoed through the room. "Shut up," his face twisted with hatred. "You were nothing but a pawn." The two of them exploded, screaming, accusing, confessing, every lie, every betrayal, every crime. They revealed everything while federal agents watched silently. The scene was almost surreal. Two predators who had spent years destroying other people's lives were now tearing each other apart, like rats fighting on a sinking ship. I stood quietly in the corner, arms crossed, watching. The silver pen Yvonne had left me rested in my breast pocket. For a moment I thought of her. Justice had finally arrived. The truth had won. Greed had consumed itself. The federal agent stepped forward. Cold steel handcuffs closed around Savannah's wrists, then Preston's. The sound was final. Savannah began crying uncontrollably. Her elegant red gown was torn and wrinkled. Mascara streaked down her face. She looked at me, begging, "Please, Dad, I made a mistake. Give me one chance." I didn't hesitate. "I am not your father." My voice cut through the room like ice. "The law will answer you now." The agents escorted them away. Camera flashes exploded outside the storage room. The downfall of Savannah and Preston would be front-page news by morning. I should have felt relief. Instead, a strange uneasiness settled over me. Something wasn't finished. Something bigger still lurked in the shadows. I stepped back into the main corridor. My first thought was Terrence. I needed to see my son. I needed proof with my own eyes that he was safe. Before I could take another step, Victor approached. His expression was unusually serious. In his hands was a small, rust-covered metal box. "We found this inside a hidden compartment in Preston's private safe." He handed it to me. The moment I saw the symbol engraved on the lid, the world seemed to stop. My pulse disappeared. The hallway vanished. The voices vanished. Everything vanished. Because I knew that symbol. I hadn't seen it in 20 years. Not since the night that changed my life forever. It was the insignia of a covert financial task force, a unit that officially never existed, a unit whose members had either disappeared or died. Slowly, my fingers closed around the box. Victor noticed the change in my face. "Warren," I didn't answer. My eyes remained locked on the emblem. Because only 4 people in the world had possessed that symbol. 3 of them were dead. And the 4th was the man whose name had appeared in the anonymous messages. The man everyone believed had died 2 decades earlier. Michael Vance. My younger brother. With trembling hands I opened the rusted box. Inside lay a faded photograph, a classified government file, and a handwritten note. The note contained only 6 words. 6 words that shattered everything I thought I knew. Yvonne knew the truth all along. The black rose emblem engraved on the rusted metal box left me motionless for a moment. It was the symbol of the underground financial organization I had sworn to destroy 20 years earlier. Preston Sinclair had never been the true mastermind. He had merely been a pawn on a much larger chessboard. Slowly, I placed the box inside my leather briefcase. A greater war might await in the future. But tonight, justice for my family had finally been served. 1 month later, the court delivered its verdict. Savannah was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her role in the kidnapping conspiracy and financial fraud. Preston Sinclair received a 12-year sentence for money laundering and organized criminal activity. All illicit assets belonging to Sinclair Corporation were seized by the government. Savannah's parents, who had enabled and encouraged their daughter's greed for years, were forced out of their luxurious mansion. They returned to a life of poverty and humiliation on the outskirts of the city. It was a fitting ending for those who had spent their lives sowing destruction. I returned home. The cold Atlanta rain had finally passed. Warm morning sunlight now filled the sky. I removed the powerful pinstripe suit. I returned Ivan's silver pen to its place inside the war room. Then I put on my familiar old sweater once again. Stepping into the small backyard garden, I paused. White roses were blooming everywhere beneath the morning sun. The scent of damp earth and fresh flowers filled the air. Terence walked outside and stood beside me. The color had returned to his face. The fear and confusion were gone. He was no longer the naive engineer who had allowed himself to be manipulated. He had grown stronger, wiser. His company was secure. His patents were protected. His future belonged to him once again. Together we stood quietly among the white roses swaying in the breeze. And in that peaceful moment I knew Ivan was finally at rest. Life is full of turns we never expect. Sometimes you will encounter people who mistake kindness for weakness. People who see generosity as something to exploit. But remember this, being kind does not mean being weak. Being gentle does not mean being powerless. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is the gathering of strength while waiting for the right moment. Never mistake an older person's silence for defeat. True power is not found in shouting. It is found in the truth patiently prepared and carefully revealed. The harshest revenge against evil is not violence. It is the firm hand of justice. It is watching those who built their lives through deception lose everything they stole. Live with integrity. Protect your family. Defend the values that matter most. And never lose faith in justice. If you enjoyed this ending, please share the story. Have you ever had to teach an arrogant person a lesson about respect? I'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening.